Good evening. Good evening and welcome. The board meeting of the Board of Education for December 3rd, 2019 is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on has been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV services website. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, in addition to approving the charter for the Community Budget Review Committee, we will be discussing the superintendent's goals and evaluation template and receiving an update on the supports being provided to our schools identified as in need of improvement. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to provide your report when you get back to your seat?
Good evening, directors, and to our audience who's here present or listening at home. A few things I wanted to touch on this evening. Clicker. There we go. First of all, want to welcome back families, students, and the board after this holiday weekend. I know the next 3 weeks are going to be busy as we try to wrap up the semester and continue on some important work strands and tasks before the winter break. But I'm expecting a strong finish to the 2019 calendar year. I wanted to make mention of a few areas that are part of this ongoing work, some of which you're going to hear a little bit about this evening. You're going to get an update, board, on our continued work in implementing federal Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, requirements, which tie directly to priorities outlined in the state level Student Success Act. I know that's a lot of terms and acronyms, and we're going to try to paint a picture there, of which you see an illustration here about how those are nested opportunities that we have in front of us. All of it, we're using our district vision, Reimagine PPS, as our sort of guiding vision for each of these associated plans. So board will begin to see how we're really framing all these compliance documents through the lens of our student graduate portrait, our educator essentials, and more appropriately in this work around the transformational system shifts that we believe we need to make. So while these are three separate plans that we're accountable through, whether it's through ESSA, our continuous improvement plan, the State Student Success Act, which I know has gotten a lot of attention, or our own district internal strategic plan, we're going to do our best to be really intentional about nesting these plans together so that we leverage the opportunity and the investments that go into them. And we do have some performance goals that go with them. You'll recognize these, and I think they'll be part of a conversation probably later this evening, which our Board of Education has set out as far as 3-year targets for where we want to see our students performing. So as you know, the board has laid out 4 goal areas. These are academic milestones or indicators of the kinds of student outcomes that we want to see, certainly 3rd grade reading and 5th grade math, and certainly what does a snapshot at the 8th grade look like when we concentrate or focus on a whole education for 8th grade students that will get them to the graduate portrait that we imagine in our vision, and also what does being ready for college and career look like? How do we make sure, as we afford equitable opportunities for our students to choose either an academic pathway or a career technical opportunity, that there are indicators that our students are ready to succeed after high school? A little bit of a timeline about sort of how we're conceptualizing the phases of this work. If you recall, this in October, we conducted quite a vigorous process of community engagement to really hear directly what the perceived needs are from our students, staff, families across the school district, part of which because the exercise was required through the Student Success Act, but I think we did a rather robust job in trying to create as many of those input sessions as possible to hear from a broad cross-section of our stakeholders. So I know that staff was able to synthesize that feedback into some key categories and some themes, and those were shared with the board at our November 5th work session. So at this point, we're now sort of in this second block of work, attempting to connect those themes of the needs assessment, thinking about how they relate to the systems shifts in our vision, which is going to form the basis of our multi-year strategic plan / business plan. So we're going to stay steady on that work. Over the next 3 months, we're going to continue refining those plans so that we can be as strategic as possible about those investments to both support the goals in the plan and look forward to presenting that to the board in late February. But it will be exciting to begin to capture on paper a multi-year blueprint for how we advance towards the accelerated student outcomes that we want to see. So on a slightly different topic, but also related to careful planning of important work that impacts on our students' experience, in the fall of 2018-19, the Visual and Performing Arts team, led by Kristen Brayson, embarked on a 3-year process to develop a more discrete strategic plan for visual and performing arts education in PPS, known as the Master Arts Education Plan, MAEP. I actually just had the opportunity to meet with some of our students who have been involved in the designing of this master plan. And I actually asked Ms. Brayson if she would do a quick commercial to give the board a little bit of an update on the progress to date, just to cede a little bit of my report time for an update. Ms. Brayson?
Thank you, Superintendent Guadalupe Guerrero, and thank you, Board Chair Amy Constam and Board Directors. We really appreciate having this little commercial break. We wanted to give you a really quick snapshot of where we're at, and we will come back to you with more information through some memos and our State of the Arts report that's going to happen in late February. What we want to tell you right now is a snapshot is in phase 2. We have pulled together 32 PPS teachers from all across the region, all different disciplines, all grade bands. We have 14 student stakeholders, equally from representing all of our clusters, and we have 22 local community arts organizations such as the Oregon Ballet Theater, Oregon Symphony, etc. This year, our project has included revisiting our mission and vision for visual and performing arts, and also looking at strategic goals. We are distinctly trying to align those items with the graduate portrait, the educator essentials, and the system shifts that are a part of the PPS vision. We will do some learning journeys. We're going to go to Chicago Public Schools in a couple weeks. They have a robust Master Arts Education Plan that's been in existence for about 5 years now. So we're going to learn a little bit about what they're doing. And then we're doing regional cluster meetings where we're pulling together every single teacher, visual and performing arts in the district. They're looking at our strategic goals, giving us some feedback. We're going to massage that and then come back and give you a version to look at so you can really sink your teeth into what we're looking at for the future. Is there anything you'd like to add?
You got it all. That was perfect.
And you introduce yourself.
My name's Carolyn Hazel Drake. I'm the Visual and Performing Arts TOSA, specifically focused on visual arts education. Thrilled to be back and continuing with this work. Look forward to see you again soon.
And one of the major investments you made last year as a board was to put some money in for a music TOSA. She's with her baby tonight at home. She couldn't be here, but her name's Laura Arthur, and she is supporting all our music education in the district. So thank you so much. Great investments happening.
Thank you to our fabulous VAPA team. Speaking of the arts, tomorrow morning I'm going to be joining close to 500 students and staff from Harriet Tubman Middle School for a day at the movies, educational movies. We're so excited to be able to send the entire student body from Harriet Tubman to enjoy and learn about their school's namesake, Harriet Tubman. We believe this is an exciting and enriching opportunity for our students who, after watching the film, will return to school for an afternoon full of lessons and student-led discussions, including a panel discussing the question, if Harriet Tubman were alive today, what would she think about the interpretation of her work and her life? I want to send a sincere thanks and appreciation to O Planning and Design for your friendship and partnership. In partnership with the Fund for Portland Public Schools and the Superintendent's Office, we're able to make this opportunity possible for our students. So thank you for your generous support. I'm looking forward to that event in the morning. And just a preview of coming attractions, speaking of which, I want to congratulate the Franklin High School community for their incredible accomplishment as state champions in 2 areas, boys soccer and the cross-country team. So I want to give kudos to our talented student athletes for their hard work to get here. Stay tuned. They'll be here at our next board gathering in person, so we can congratulate them in person. But kudos to our athletes. Shout out to Principal Frazier and his school team for what's turned out to be quite an incredible year. Just this year, Franklin has brought home 2 state championships, an Oregon Teacher of the Year award, and this year's student representative on the board, Maxine, is also a Franklin student. I don't know if there's a connection, but
Lightning strikes.
Lightning is striking, so keep up the great work, and I know our board will be happy to congratulate them and celebrate at our next gathering. So congratulations to Franklin High School, and that concludes my report. Thank you.
Exciting. Thank you very much. It's exciting to hear about the progress of the arts master planning work. Maxine, do you have a report?
Yeah, I have to figure out how my microphone works, and then yes, I do. Hi. I'm still not very good at these, so if I talk fast, I apologize. So I, myself, student representative, I've been working a lot on the search and seizure policy, working on getting student input, involved in how to revise that policy even more, as it wasn't brought to students to start with, and that's like my whole life's passion at the moment. As for the district student council, we started working with the Multnomah Youth Commission and about later start times, but we're pausing our work with them currently to kind of recenter ourselves, which we're going to be doing on December 14th through a retreat where we're going to figure out our yearly student summit process and if we're going to, how different student communities are going to be represented through that. The SRO State of the Union is also coming up on December 18th, which is really exciting, where we're going to be, our students from multiple PPS schools as well as students who are not in our school district are helping to plan the event. And the purpose is to see students represented in the intergovernmental agreement between PPS and the Portland Police Bureau through panels, hearing from law enforcement and hearing from students about the impacts that the SROs and how law enforcement have on students, and especially students of color and people of color. We also, just before this board meeting, the District Student Council did a little mixer with senior leadership team and the board, which is really exciting. We were able to hear from everyone about how they take student input and student voice into consideration, which is really important, especially in my role where I am student voice. Okay, I'm done, but thank you.
Thank you very much. It was great to have an opportunity to be with the rest of the District Student Council this evening. Before we begin the public comment period, I'd like to review our guidelines. The board thanks the community for taking the time to attend this meeting and provide your comments to the board. We value public input as it informs our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen without distraction. One quick reminder, any oversized signs need to be in the back foyer, and signs in the audience should not be held in a way that obstruct others' view of the meeting. Board members and the superintendent will not respond to comments or questions during public comment, but our board office will follow up on board-related issues raised during public testimony. Guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration of others. We request that complaints about individual employees be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. If you have additional materials or items you would like to provide to the board or superintendent, we ask that you give them to Board Manager Roseanne Powell to distribute to us. Presenters will have a total of 3 minutes to share your comments. Please begin by stating your name and spelling your name for the record. During the first 2 minutes of your testimony, a green light will appear. When you have 1 minute remaining, a yellow light will go on. And when your time is up, the red light will go on and a buzzer will sound. We respectfully ask that you conclude your comments at the time. We appreciate your input and thank you for your cooperation. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have anyone signed up for student or public comment this evening?
Yes. We have Tate Thomas and Ian Simpson.
Welcome.
Superintendent Guerrero, Chairperson Constam, school board members, and community members, thank you for hearing our testimony tonight. My name is Ian Simpson, Simpson, and I am here with the Student Voice for the Arts to advocate for equitable access to art and music throughout the district. I personally play French horn in the Cleveland High School band and trumpet in our jazz band. And tonight with me are student musician representatives from almost all the PPS high schools, including Jefferson, who does not currently have a music program. Since the last time we testified with you, we have celebrated many things with the district, such as Beaumont getting a 7-period day and the beginning of the Master Arts Education program. We are, however, still looking for major changes. First and foremost, the PE mandate. This mandate is still only half implemented, but is dealing major blows to the arts program throughout the district. I'm not saying that PE isn't needed. I believe the opposite. I'm saying that PPS students deserve the choice to take art, music, or theater, both for however long they want and no matter where they go. Second, but no less important, we want money. Even schools with a very successful music and arts programs, such as Cleveland and Lincoln, are having to raise all their own funds. At Cleveland, we have probably over 6 different fundraisers that we have to do over the course of the year to raise money for our needs, such as audition fees, transportation to assorted band competitions, substitutes, and financial aid for students who cannot support themselves. Students should not have to worry about funding when it comes to a school program. Both at Cleveland and Lincoln, we have a fundraiser where band members stay at school from the moment the last bell rings until almost midnight. And this is called a playathon, or in Lincoln's case, a musicathon. I'm proud to say that at Cleveland this year, we raised more than $36,000. And while this event is one of the most fun things to attend, it should not be necessary for the band program to survive. Thank you.
My name is Tavian Joe Thomas, Thomas. I want to remind the school board and the audience here tonight and those who are listening at home that I love Jefferson, I really do, and I miss playing music. Since April 2015, I have had the privilege to meet Superintendent Guerrero, Jonathan Garcia, and Kristen Brayson, and am now a member of the Master's Arts Education Plan Student Advisory Council. And I have gotten a few opportunities to play again. Yeah, it's great and all. While leaving my campus to travel to Cleveland High School in order to play is a great opportunity, it is still an inequitable solution to our situation at Jeff. I don't want to have to leave and go outside of school to play. I understand that the PPS leadership has done a fantastic job getting community participation. Thank you. Now, the state of Oregon is providing additional resources. I feel that I speak for many students when I say, please put these resources into equitable access to visual and performing arts classes, such as band, at every PPS school, regardless of enrollment. Thank you.
We have Bella Bravo and Ani Tate.
My name is Bella Bravo, B-R-A-V-O, and I play trumpet in the Lincoln High School Band. I am also one of 2 drum majors in the Lincoln High School Marching Band and am part of the Master's Art Education Student Advisory Council. When we testified last April, we shared with you concerns about the ramifications of the PE mandate that the PE mandate was having on our students in all of our middle schools. My concern was personal, relating specifically to the West Sylvan Band, as that is where my little brother is attending right now. We shared with you that after the PE mandate started to get implemented, the band took a big hit. With less open periods in the day, many kids were left with a difficult academic choice: band or world language. In the end, my little brother postponed learning a world language for band. As I said, I am currently a member of the PPS Student Advisory Council with the Master Arts Education Plan Phase 2 Stakeholders Group. It is great to see PPS receiving our student voices and perspectives from across the district in a significant way. I will share with you what I shared with the MAPE Phase 2 Stakeholders Group, in which, in so many words, is that PPS still needs to redesign the middle school schedules to accommodate district-wide equitable access to the arts programming. Why do students have to make the choice between CTE, world language, and the arts? West Sylvan and other middle schools have a 6-period day and must make this choice, whereas Oakley Green, Tubman, George, and now Beaumont Middle School all have a 7-period day and are very successful with equitable access to programs. Why are there schools that refuse to go to the 7-period day? We request that the school board and the district work together with school administrators and the teachers union to provide resources so that all students in every middle school have access to CTE, language, and arts programming. Thank you.
Now we'll have Ani Tate and Jackson Wolfe.
Yat she'et ani yanishya bilagana inshlo kitlanchitni bashaschint. Good evening. My name is Ani Tate, T-A-T-E, and I am a co-president of the Indigenous Peoples Student Union at Grant High School. I'm here today to address the Fletcher Memorial Murals, Ideals of Education, that hang on either side of Grant's auditorium. These murals represent an outdated logic of Native appropriation, misrepresentation, and erasure. They socially and psychologically oppress not only the Indigenous students at Grant, but the entire student body as well. While the Alumni Association believe these murals accurately represent the ideals of education, they are a whitewashing of the painful history that this country is built on. The ideologies depicted are based upon the perspective of a white society that invaded Indigenous land 500 years ago. The Native American student population at Grant is less than 1%. This does not mean that this issue can be overlooked. The murals depict a peaceful relationship between the Native nations of North America and settlers. Greatness in this country has not been built on the peaceful meeting between them, but rather on the mass genocide of millions of people, stolen land, and years of forced assimilation. The name of the murals, Ideals of Education, is an offensive and ignorant title considering the United States history with Indigenous people and the education system. Thousands of Native Americans were mandated to attend boarding schools. Their culture was stripped from them, and assimilating into white society was the only given option. This was America's ideal of education: to remove or relocate the indigenous people of this land permanently and force the remaining to conform to Eurocentric values. The murals include former President Ulysses S. Grant, portrayed as a supreme being. The idolizing of this former president, who represents colonialism, enshrines the violence United States presidents have inflicted upon indigenous people throughout history. When asked what tribe the natives in the painting represented, the Grant Alumni Association said that they were not specific to a tribe and were illustrated to represent all tribes and minority groups. These stereotypical images contribute to the generalization and appropriation of Native culture that has been ingrained in our society. Anything that enforces these ideals does not belong in a school. Grant takes pride in its endorsement of Race Forward and Grant's Equity Club, two student-led organizations that work to combat what these murals represent. Keeping these murals up is an act of support for the ideas and depictions that they highlight. Do we want to perpetrate this message in a school? Grant has no obligation to preserve historic pieces that inaccurately reflect history and oppress our student body. Because of these truths, we at IPSU and members of Grant High School propose a community art project that accurately reflects the values of our community to replace these murals. As long as these murals remain hanging, idolized by the efforts to maintain and restore their message, Grant will be supporting the anti-Indigenous environment that these murals communicate and create. I hope we can take this opportunity to improve our school environment and to make it a safe and supportive space where every student can flourish. Thank you.
Good evening, board members and Superintendent Guerrero. My name is Jackson Wolfe, WLFE. I'm the co-president of the Grant Indigenous People Student Union, formerly the Native American Student Union at Grant High School. I've been a member since our club's creation when I was a freshman. For the past 4 years, we have been working to raise the visibility of Native American students to give us a voice in our school. The murals in the Grant Auditorium represent white supremacy. On each side, elevated is a human figure on what one could say is an illuminated cross. People of color appearing to march up steps as if literally walking towards the light. In the center are 4 Native Americans, 2 in full headdress, looking at 4 pilgrims waving. Lastly, in the upper corners are images of General Grant and Susan B. Anthony. The murals, entitled Ideals of Education, misrepresent history. They depict kind, nonviolent interactions between colonizers and tribal people. This is not accurate. We are surveying the students and staff at Grant. So far, out of 129 responses, 105 state that they are not emotionally connected to these murals. You have received a letter via email from Dr. Angie Morrell, the Director of Indian Education at PPS. In her letter, which I have copies for each of you, she writes, quote, "Native students in Portland Public Schools are struggling. They rarely see themselves represented in their schools, in their support staff, teachers, and administrators, which means murals and other stereotypical representations may be the only reflection of Native people our students see. This harms Native students, and it is also harmful for all students, teachers, and staff. It is not insignificant when schools display racist, stereotypical representations of Native Americans, teach Native Americans as only having relevance in history lessons, and those history lessons do not end well for Native Americans. Murals like the ones at Grant High School support damaging narratives, including Native erasure, manifest destiny, and the inevitable extinction of indigenous peoples." David J. Silverman last week wrote an article entitled "Native Americans Have Little to Celebrate on Thanksgiving." He begins by saying the mythical harmony of the first Thanksgiving taught in schools is the most obvious offense against history. After that, it just gets worse. Native people widely agree that the U.S. has yet to reckon with its history of white violence against their people. Instead, the country uses the myth of the first Thanksgiving to make it appear that Indians consented bloodlessly to colonialism. This myth is reinforced over and over again through grade school. It is terrible history and even worse civics, end quote. This is what the Grant murals reflect. This is my experience as a Native American, African American student, having students in my elementary school say to me, "You're not Indian." I say, "Yes, I am." Then they say, "Do you have a refrigerator?" I say, "Yes," and they say, "Native Americans do not have refrigerators." This is my brother in 5th grade staying up to correct the homework worksheets from past tense to present tense. Do not let this continue at Grant High School. Keeping the murals up continues the false narrative that all Indians are dead. We are still here. Portland Public Schools has a responsibility to teach the truth. Portland Public Schools outlines its responsibility to see and value all students in the PPS Racial Educational Equity Policy. We're asking you to help Native American students succeed. Thank you.
Superintendent Guerrero, I'm wondering if we can get a legal opinion of whether the display of the murals is aligned with our racial equity education policy? Not right now, but
I don't know
That
if
was
it's
a general-
I don't know if it's a legal opinion or the board applying its own policy to.
so it'd be useful, I guess,
An
to have a
analysis of the
staff
situation.
point of view about the alignment, because the policy talks about creating a welcoming environment that reflects and supports the racial and ethnic diversity of our student population and community. So,
I think we do have a staff analysis underway to get back to us regarding the murals in response to your direct questions to us. Yeah. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have further? Thank you so much, guys. Do we have further public comment?
Yes. Jose Barrios and Rosemary Colliver.
My name is Jose Barrios, that's Barrios, and I'd like to start off by saying how impressed I am with the students here. I feel like I really need to up my game considering me and microphones don't really get along. So thank you, students. Again, my name is Jose Barrios, and I'm on the board of directors for Mount Scott, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the other CBOs. Before I get started, I'd like to share a little bit about myself and the emotional connection that I have with the students at Mount Scott and the other CBOs. It's definitely a story of vulnerability. I want to express my gratitude for allowing me to share my ideas. In some places around the world, your ideas will get you killed, and that's where my story starts. In 1981, my family and I came here as political refugees from El Salvador. We had a senator from Connecticut sponsor our family because our lives were in danger. Because of my life circumstances, my educational journey was difficult. The socioeconomic realities that I faced weren't always in my favor, not at that point at least. I was a low-income minority student. I was also an ESL student. I had working parents that worked very hard to provide for us. I was a horrible student, and I was sure not making healthy choices. I failed second grade. I was always getting bad grades. I ended up going to night school and then eventually ended up going into community college. All institutions that were there to support me and gave me a second chance, in particular the community college, that taught me that I actually was smart. I thought I wasn't smart because I got bad grades, and I learned to hide. I hid from my teachers. I learned to smile at them, and that got me through. From these obstacles came a transformational journey that's led me to be an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, it's okay to be different and look at certain things in different ways. Today, under my leadership, we generate a couple $1 million of business that goes directly back into the Portland communities, and our efforts help support several dozen families, mostly that are minority families. Today, I have the freedom of time to help out in Mount Scott. And there's a couple things about Mount Scott and the other CBOs that I would like to share with you, is that we do more with less, and as a proud entrepreneur, that's kind of the foundation of any successful entrepreneur, is to take a limited amount of resources and make them more productive. There's a lot of creativity that goes along with running a school like Mount Scott or the other CBOs. The facility issues, administrative issues, the finance, the marketing, it's all very similar to running a business. But the one thing that I really want to share you the most, that I'm most proud of, is that it's the choice that students have to be there. It's something that they want. They're not forced to be there, and nor is Mount Scott forced or the other CBOs to take them on. It's that they all want to be there. It's always very impressive to me that the Portland Public School students actually have a choice in this, that they can choose to make a better life for them at such a young age. Just like I'm impressed with the students that come in here and express their opinions, it's the same thing with the CBO students, is that they choose to be there, and they don't want to be in the cracks anymore, but they have a voice here, and I have the Portland Public Schools to help to thank for that. Also with the teachers too, it's always remarkable. I think when we go to work, we always try to find ways to make our work easier and quicker. The sooner we can get off, the better. Not these teachers, I promise you this. They actually run into the building when it's on fire. And they love what they do. But unfortunately, with the rising living costs that we have here in Portland, wages aren't enough to keep up with living in this community. Also, with the mental health issues that our students are facing, the life and death is a reality. With school shootings and suicide rates being so high, we really need to support these teachers to the best that we can.
Need to ask you to wrap up your comments,
okay.
please. Thank you.
I thank you for this time, and I got my point across, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm Rosemary Colliver, Colliver, Head of Legal and Business Affairs for Shadow Machine Animation. I got involved with Mount Scott in 2007 while working with Stoll Reeves and have been on the board for nearly 13 years. Like Jose, I'm here to support equitable investment in Mount Scott and other CBOs. I've spent years watching Mount Scott serve our community every day by doing more with less than other PPS schools, while serving the district students that need it most. This is not fair, not equitable, and fortunately, it's not sustainable. I have my own story. It's amazing what a difference 10 months can make. My sister is 10 months older than me. My mother left my abusive father the night he held a shotgun to her mouth on our front porch and put herself through nursing school. My sister was just enough older than me that the experience of my father in our lives had left its mark. She dropped out of high school after her sophomore year. She's never learned to trust. And her sons, one is pushing back from a history of drugs and prison. The other was released from prison yesterday. What if she'd had a Mount Scott and learned to trust, like the most dire cases at Mount Scott learn, and then go on to flourish in their lives? It would have changed her story and her two boys and all of the many lives they continue to touch. PPS talks a lot about equity. The CBOs live equity. Their students talk about how they were invisible at school, at home, and in our community. They come to us with the belief that no one cared about them. Mount Scott staff makes the effort to hear these students, to see them, to show them in their daily actions and attention that they are cared for and important, and that their voice is worthy of being heard. I've watched the breaking down of walls and building of trust. I've celebrated their successes, building lives that otherwise would have been dreams. But I'm frustrated by how the CBOs have to sacrifice to make this happen, to serve the neediest students with considerably less funding. Mount Scott is a model of building social, emotional, and behavioral health in students, but it is not sustainable to continue its programming with less money. These are PPS students. They deserve to be treated with equity and receive the same funding as any other. So while PPS talks about equity, the Student Investment Account within the Student Success Act literally affords PPS the opportunity to put its money where its mouth is. The Student Investment Account is to help meet students' mental and behavioral health needs and increase academic achievement for the population the CBOs specifically serve. Why would this targeted funding apply any differently to these students? PPS's underfunding of the CBOs sends a message that they are worth less. This is PPS's chance to send the message that all students are important to the fabric of our community as our future teachers, police officers, and business owners like Jose. The CBOs are preparing a proposal for an equitable allocation of the Student Investment Account funding to their programs. You should receive this in the next couple weeks. It's our hope that with the district and board support of this proposal, we can reduce the financial strain that these schools have existed under year after year, and you can put equity into action. Thank you very much.
And Bonnie, Gregory, and Donna Cohen.
folks have these sheets? I need you to have. Okay, so have them handy, please. Okay. Want to go over? Okay.
My name is Bonnie Gregory, Gregory, and I'm speaking this evening about social and emotional boosts in the Portland Public Schools. I'll be reading excerpts from a Los Angeles Times article that was printed in June 18th, 2018, because the issues that it addresses relates to Portland Public Schools. School murals remind Newport children that you are loved. You are loved. The affirmation is in letters 6 feet tall and stretching more than 50 feet at Harborview and Lincoln Schools in Corona Del Mar. At Harborview, it towers over a playground, a kind of verbal hug from Boston-based muralist Alex Cook. Cook started his You Are Loved messaging about 5 years ago when he was painting a mural at a school in New Orleans. The principal there told him she wanted her students to feel safe. So they came up with encouraging phrases that could be part of the mural. You are beautiful. You are important. You are needed. You can do it. You are loved. Back in Newport Beach, a parent came across Alex Cook on Facebook. She immediately connected with his message and felt it was needed for Newport children after a student at Corona Del Mar High School committed suicide. At Harborview, 60 sixth graders participated in the mural. You are loved. Oh, wow. The children were thrilled to be part of the process. Principal Todd Schmidt said, "It sets the right tone for this school and fits with the social and emotional learning that teachers hope the children will take away with their academic lessons." There is a You Are Loved mural here in Portland. It was just completed at Thinker Toys in Multnomah Village at Southwest Capitol Highway and 35th. I hope you take a look at it. I would love to see these murals in Portland Public Schools. Thank you.
So my name is Donna Cohen, and I was a technology ed teacher, and I have an MAD in CTE administration. And I just want to comment on how much you all, just listening to everybody tonight, how much you all are dealing with as members of the board and superintendent, and just I'm aware of that gravity. So I'm here to talk about two things. One, briefly, Roosevelt has two issues right now to deal with, and one is classroom space, as you may have heard of, which is far more serious than the community has been led on up to this point. The school was underbuilt. The estimates I get are that in the next 2 to 3 years we're going to need something like 24 more classrooms. And this is far more than the space that the district wants to take that was to go to STEM engineering. So this needs to be dealt with and dealt with very seriously and very soon. But in terms of STEM engineering and the space it needs, if you take a look at the drawing that I gave you, the whole essence of STEM engineering is integration and having students working in teams, solving problems, coming up with solutions, having at their disposal to create these solutions a vast array of technologies. And these technologies need to be co-located. So as you can see here in this example, we have everything: the computer lab, high-tech rapid prototyping equipment, 3D printers, metalworking, woodworking, and so forth, and all visible wherever a teacher stands in that facility. This is how STEM is supposed to work. On the first page I gave you, you see a project that was done by the current STEM engineering teacher, Randy Scott, who's doing a great job with limited facility. So they did these pinball machines, and here's the thing: they had students in different classes in different parts of the school working on different parts of these projects. This is not what STEM is about. STEM is having everybody together, working in teams, sharing the knowledge, using the different technologies, and that's what we need. So as it happens, this drawing, today several of the STEM advocates met with the two deputy superintendents. We talked about an alternative to using the second floor and how the second floor of the new addition actually could be enlarged. And as it happens, the size that we're working with right here is, and this is something that we've never heard in this whole discussion, according to the educational specifications of this district. What we have right now for STEM engineering is less than half of what the district says, and you have the ed specs right on the back of the sheet. So this is the size it's supposed to be. This is the size we could have with our alternative plan. We would like the superintendent to talk with the deputy superintendents and have them look into this plan. We think it'll work for everybody. Thank you very much.
Greg Myers and Chris Walters.
Good evening. My name is Greg Myers, M-E-Y-E-R-S. I've been a PPS head custodian for 13 years. Tonight, I'm here to speak on behalf of all the PPS custodians, especially the custodians who cannot be here because they are out working in our buildings right now, making them clean and safe for tomorrow. 13 years ago, the custodians were told that after many surveys, we were overpaid. The remedy to this situation the district came up with was to freeze our wages for 3 years. Imagine being told by your employer that you will not receive a raise for 3 years, no matter how well you do your job. Who would stay at that job? You know who stayed? The PPS custodians stayed. That's who. We stayed and we did the job we were hired to do. In the past 13 years, we have received 5 step increases. Step increases are the equivalent of an annual raise. 13 years and 5 true raises that follow the guidelines of our contract. Who would stay at a job where you only get a raise every other year? Apparently, the PPS custodians, because once again, we stayed and we did our job. The largest across-the-board raise that PPS custodians have received in 13 years is 3%. 3% is not a raise. 3% is a cost of living adjustment. No one has ever gotten ahead in life on 3%. Whoops. After 13 years of wage freezes and limited raises, the PPS custodians are no longer overpaid. The PPS starting wage for custodians is now lower than several of the other districts in the surrounding area. In fact, the starting wage in some of the districts is higher than what PPS custodians who have worked for the district for several years are currently getting paid. But for some reason, even these custodians have stayed and done their job. We've reached a point where we can no longer recruit people to fill our vacancies. Some of the new hires stay long enough to get trained, and then they move on to do the same job in another district that pays a higher wage. We are great trainers, apparently. Why have the rest of us all stayed for the last 13 years? It isn't for the money, obviously. We stay because we care. We stay because we care about the people and we care about our buildings. We stay because we take pride in what we do. It's time for the district to acknowledge the sacrifices, both financial and physical, that the custodians have endured for the last 13 years. It's time for the district to show the custodians the respect that we have earned in the last 13 years by coming to the bargaining table and negotiating a fair contract, a contract that includes annual step increases and a true livable wage increase for the people whom the district has entrusted the care of our schools. It is time. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chris Walters, W-A-L-T-E-R-S. In 2008, a nutrition services assistant started at $10.11 per hour, which was $2.16 above the Oregon minimum wage. That year, the fair market rent for a one-bedroom in the Portland metro area, as determined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, was $655 per month or $7,860 per year. A starting assistant working a fairly standard shift of 5 hours could expect to make $9,099 per year. That amount was $1,239 above the fair market rent. In 2018, the starting wage was $12.45 per hour, only 45 cents above the minimum wage. The fair market rent for a one-bedroom was $1,132 per month, or $13,584 per year. That assistant working for 5 hours a day could expect to make $11,205 per year, which is $2,379 below fair market rent. A wage that does not cover rent is not a living wage. HUD defines someone as rent burdened if they pay more than 30% of their income in rent. Nutrition services doesn't even pay for 100% of their rent, don't mention food, transportation, or anything else. For many years, nutrition services paid about $2 above minimum wage, which is enough to be competitive at the low end of the job market. We're now barely scraping above minimum wage, and it shows. We are in a continuous state of crisis because we cannot attract enough workers to fill our open positions. The workers that we do have are underpaid, overworked, at higher risk of injury, and are more likely to leave because of this. The Society for Human Resource Management states that the average cost to hire an employee is $4,129. Our high turnover costs the district a lot of money. David Douglas pays new hires $14.17 per hour. Hillsborough pays new kitchen helpers $14 per hour and cooks $14.95. Once upon a time, PPS Nutrition Services paid a relatively competitive wage and could reasonably expect to have enough substitutes to fill the gaps most days. Now our workers are burning out from often being short-staffed. Our managers, who are supposed to support us, can't because they are out at the schools every day doing our jobs and getting paid $45,000 to $75,000 per year to do the job that they pay us $11,000 to do. Those are the logical reasons why the people who serve children lunch every day should be paid a competitive wage. Paying people a wage that doesn't even cover rent isn't just bad business, it's immoral. Paying people sub-poverty wages is wrong. Balancing a budget by not paying workers a living wage is wrong. People who serve students with a smile despite their aching shoulders and sore backs deserve to be treated and paid like they matter, because we absolutely do matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of you for coming out tonight. Thank you very much, and thank you for everything you do for our kids every day. Do you have any further public comment?
No.
All right, at this time, the board will vote on our business agenda. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the business agenda?
No.
Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the business agenda? Oh, yes.
I just wanted to ask a question. I'm a little confused about the I-5 Rose Quarter transition, or the thing that I'm confused about. If when voting yes on it, does that mean that we oppose it? Does that make sense?
Are you planning on being here for this discussion?
Probably. It's a separate item, okay.
No. Right. So we're not voting on those with the
Okay.
business agenda right now, if that's what your question is.
Yeah, that's what my question
And then we'll get
was.
to that. Are you, if you have a request to switch the order of any of
No,
our
I
agenda
don't have
items,
a-
we can do that later.
No, I don't have a strong opinion on that. I was just confused because
It is
it's
confusing
in the,
because
it's
they're
in the
listed
business
on the business agenda.
That's all. That
Right.
was my confusion.
Right.
I'll make a.
But like I knew
I'll make
that
a-
we were gonna. Sorry, you go. I'm
no,
done.
No, I'll make a motion to approve the business agenda, but Chair Constam, can you read the resolutions, the four that are going to be on the business agenda tonight?
Yes, just a moment.
I think you have it in your script.
So 6,001, 6,002, 6,003, and 6,004.
Great.
Okay, so Director, and 6,005 are all included on the business agenda. Director Scott moves. Do we have a second? Director Bailey seconds the business agenda. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any? Ms. Kane, do you have a?
In looking at the business agenda, there appears to be other resolutions on that agenda. Are you wanting to do those separately?
Those are called out on our agenda for individual votes this evening, yes.
Okay,
I think
thank
they're in error.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Do we have any public comment on the business agenda?
No.
All right, is there any additional board discussion on the business agenda?
I have a short question on 6006. I had a question about 6006. Just a clarifying question. I think this is for Dr. Cuellar.
Dr. Cuellar, are you here?
I'll ask the superintendent. You can choose who to. There was some back and forth about the literacy coaches that were impacted through Resolution 6006, and it wasn't.
I believe 6,005.
I'm sorry,
Is what you're
6005.
referring to?
Sorry. A question about whether the literacy coaches for cohort 3, whether this settlement means that it goes through the end of the end of the school year of spring, or whether it stops in January. I just looking for a clarification.
Through the school year.
My understanding is that it's for the remainder of this school year, 2019-20.
Great,
And
thanks.
thank you, we did receive a staff response to that effect.
Right, there was just some confusion in the school community about whether it went through the end of the school year, so just appreciate the clarification.
And can I ask another clarifying question? Is Resolution 6006 included in the consent agenda?
No. Those are the superintendent goals. We have a separate item tonight on the agenda.
No, that's not the goals.
It's being deferred.
Oh, excuse me, yes, it is being deferred until a later date when the work has been completed, and that has been agreed to by the complainant.
Okay.
Can someone clarify which resolutions were actually, I mean,
So-
if there's any that have been removed, such as 6006, are there any others?
Excuse me, I should have pointed that out. So I'll point it out later on the agenda, but it was on the consent agenda. We had a complaint that was to come to us tonight, and that is what is being deferred because it had to do with the security improvements at Wilson High School, and due to contracting issues, that work has not been completed yet. So the resolution of the substance of the complaint is being deferred until that work has been completed, and that was done in agreement with the original complainant. So that will come back to us when that work has been completed.
Is that the only one in the list here between 6001 and 6009?
And the 6007, this adoption of the superintendent's, that says goals, but it should say performance evaluation template, and then the Rose Quarter issue and the Community Budget Review Committee charter will be voting on individually. So those should not be listed on the consent
Okay,
agenda.
so 6006, 6007, 6008.
And 6009. 6006 has been removed. The subsequent ones will be voting on individually. And right now, with the, for the business agenda, we are voting on 6001 through 6005.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the board will now vote on resolution 6001 through 6005 in the business agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? The business agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
I'm channeling my previous chair position here. Don't we have to do something with 6006?
We can make a motion to postpone it to a date certain. What my understanding is, you want to postpone it until April when the work is done. Is that correct?
Or just remove it from the consent
Or do you want to
agenda?
remove it today?
We should remove it, have a motion to remove it from the, it actually shouldn't have been on the consent agenda.
Right.
Originally, it should have been on the regular agenda, but if you would like to introduce a motion to
remove it from-
remove it, that would be helpful.
So moved.
Do we want to do that for all four of those, to formally remove them from the consent agenda?
I don't think we need to do that if we're going to be voting on them individually. That is a clerical error.
So what you're asking to do is, the motion now is for resolution 6000 through 6005, correct?
Correct.
So. Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So do we need action on 6006?
On 6006, you need to remove it, a motion to remove it.
We have a motion on the table.
Okay, wait a minute. So the motion that we voted on was a consent agenda including 6001 through 6005, right?
Correct.
6006 was not included.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, so we don't have to remove it if it,
We don't have to. We don't have to, but we're just telegraphing that we will return to the matter at a later date. This was late-breaking news today in consultation with the complainant relative to the work. Thank you very much. The business agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0. Okay, next, getting to the very heart of our work in the district. We have an update on all of our planning for district support for schools identified for improvement under the Every Student Succeeds Act. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce this next item?
Yes, and I'm going to ask our deputy, Dr. Cuellar, and he's being joined by some colleagues as well. They'll introduce themselves. But just to tee it up here as they take their seats, I think, as I mentioned in my report at the front of the meeting, we have a few simultaneous processes going on right now under different requirements at the federal, state, and our own local district level. And so we're trying to operate in some integrated and aligned ways. You saw the diagram about how these plans are hoped for to be nested. But what we want to make sure we provide you is we have a round of information that we'll be submitting, and wanted to make sure the board had awareness about that submission related to ESSA specifically. So we've had quite a team working on this, which I will continue to thank for their diligence on this, but I'll let Dr. Cuellar get us started on this presentation.
I think there's two important lenses on this work. One is the essence of the work of school improvement, and particularly as it relates to our adopted board goals on student achievement. And then part of what you're talking about tonight are the actual compliance artifacts that need to be created, explaining the strategies that are going to get us to the improvement that we want to see. So we want to hear about both levels.
Absolutely. Good evening, Chair Constant, Vice Chair Brendan Edwards, Directors, Superintendent Guerrero. I'm joined here by Leslie Odell, who is our Senior Director of Funded Programs and Early Learning. And to my left, to your right, is Scott Whitback, our Senior Director of School Improvement and Operations. And also behind me, we're joined by one of our regional superintendents, Keely Simpson, who also directly supervises a cluster of schools, primarily our CSI schools, which is relevant to this conversation. We are here to present a very high-level overview around the progress report on district and school continuous improvement. To your point, Chair Constant, we do want to make sure that we're touching on both critical points. But also I wanted to be also very open to the board as well, is that if there's any specific questions or especially granular questions regarding specific supports for schools, we'd be more than happy to be able to provide that information away from this presentation, just also for the sake of time as well. This is more of a high-level district whole approach around how we are really wrapping around and supporting our schools from a high level. And so any school-specific information, I'd be more than happy to give that to you individually.
Just to kind of give a brief overview, just to provide some context to this evening's update. In 2017, August of 2017, the U.S. Department of Education approved the Oregon's Consolidated State Plan. And in that accountability model, it really shifts the focus to strengthening district systems, and with the accountability and supplemental funding shifting from the schools directly to the district for their continuous improvement efforts. Previously, in the old model, the focus and priority model, you had the schools really reporting to ODE under their timelines with their systems, approving their expenses, as it were. And so that relationship between ODE and the schools became really strong, and the unintended consequence of that is often the districts were not involved in the comprehensive improvement conversations. And so under this new law, that has shifted, that's corrected. And so in the fall of 1819, the ODE identified the new schools under the new model of needing improvement, targeted and comprehensive supports for improvement. Districts and schools are charged with creating comprehensive needs assessment and drafting comprehensive improvement plans to be implemented this year. Although the timelines on that have really shifted over the past 18 months for a lot of other factors, but one really big factor with that timeline shift was the passage of the Student Success Act, with a recognition of what are all of the other accountability and what are the other processes and things that we have to do too that directly intersect with that work. As our superintendent highlighted this evening in his report, we've really looked at this as an opportunity to really work holistically with our strategic planning process that will meet the needs of our community and we are absolutely on track to meet all those ODE requirements. I'm a clicker novice, so I think we all know what the key elements for continuous improvement are, but from accountability perspective, ODE really boils it down to these 4 points, which is, determine what's working and what needs to change, establish a process to engage stakeholders to effect change, leverage effective practices to implement a plan, and use data to monitor and make timely adjustments to improve the outcomes. And so we are becoming more adept as a system in using that continuous improvement model in support of our schools in improvement status. And so But to keep in mind the goal, the outcome of this is really development of an ambitious, priority-driven action plans that routine collaboration with among stakeholders is reflected in the plans. And so finally, thank you. Just as a reference, here are our identified schools. You'll see that our Title I schools are highlighted in yellow. And you'll see that the schools with an asterisk are the new schools that were identified this year in the 1920 school year as needing targeted supports for improvement. Just as a reminder, ODE recognizes that every 3 years they're going to re-identify schools for comprehensive supports and improvement, but they reevaluate annually for targeted support schools. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Cuellar, who's going to talk about the system shifts that we're embarking on.
So one of the things that we've heard, especially newly coming on board, we've heard loud and clear also from the field, which includes principals, site-based administration, teachers, staff, and even internal central office professionals, was that a lot of our work in the past has been siloed in essence of how we were trying to wrap around in providing aligned, coherent, streamlined supports to schools. Central office necessarily wasn't deemed as a support mechanism or structure in how we were flooding in and providing those supports. So under Superintendent Guerrero's guidance, we developed an integrated improvement strategy that was aimed at transforming the central office function to how we became more school embedded in the day-to-day work and how we were funneling in to provide supports. And changing the narrative opposed to having schools channeling out to find supports. And ultimately thus, when we push in, that we're hoping that would have a dramatic increase in accelerating academic achievement. In future slides, we're going to talk a little bit about what that transformation process looked like. How are you transforming a central function, to where now we are taking 100+ professionals that we are now immersing into schools, providing partnership and support to our principals and our site-based staff. And we'll talk a little bit about that in more detail. One of the things that we had to be very conscious and deliberate about was, and just to kind of give an idea, I know that a lot of you that are serving on the board have served on the board for quite some time, so you know that initiatives come and go. We can talk to anybody in the field that's been in the field for a long time, and they can probably name up to 50 different initiatives that they have done in the time that they have served in schools. We actually have data that goes back to 2014 that shows the number of different types of programs and initiatives that are happening in site by site in terms of what even the data around schools that are implementing over 50+ initiatives, and what the data shows is those are our CSI schools. And so one of the things that we had to be very deliberate about was how do we concentrate all of our efforts through 3 core priorities in the academics division. This slide here illustrates that we are really focusing on 3 core initiatives on the academic side, which is through our multi-tiered systems of supports, which that initiative is housed in the Office of Student Support Services, led by Chief Martinek, our guaranteed and viable curriculum, and our implementation and rollout of our GVC work, which is led in the Office of Teaching and Learning by Dr. Valentino. And then our last core initiative coming out of the Office of School Performance, which is leadership development, and how we're really wrapping around and focusing on how we're bolstering coaching, growth, and development with every one of our leaders in our sites. So one of the things that we had to do that we haven't done typically well in the past, we had to be a lot more deliberate in terms of how we were creating a lot more cross-functional alignment and coherence around the work that we were doing. How are we bringing all of the offices and departments from the ISC division, which is the Instruction and School Communities division, how are we bringing them together to enhance collaborative efforts, to enhance alignment across all of our initiatives to where we were cross-functional and we were operating as one and not operating as isolated entities. In most cases, if we were to talk about a specific initiative or a priority in one office, somebody in the other office that's within the same division might not necessarily know what that is. So one of the things that we have to be much more purposeful around doing is how are we creating how are we being more intentional at creating more coherence and collaboration amongst our offices. One of the things that Scott Whitbeck will talk about later is we started something called lab teams this year, where we have 9 groups of instructional leadership team professionals at the central office level that is anywhere from 6 to 10 professionals that are within the academics division that are actually pushing into schools every week. And then what's happening on every other Monday is we get together as a central office ILT team, and we're actually debriefing and talking around some of the things that we are encountering in schools and helping principals also be able to break down some of those problems of practice. What this also does too is it's pushing in the central office academics team into schools, so we also have a first glance and view in terms of what the critical needs are and how we are able to provide resource. What we heard in the past was it was very hard for us to be able to provide critical resource when principals and staff are saying, you're never in our schools to even understand what the day-to-day complexities and the challenges and the needs are, but yet you're still expecting me to do A, B, C, D, and E, and F, and G, and so forth, but you're not offering us anything that we can probably take off or utilize strategically to be able to meet the needs of our students or that work. So that is something, too, that we have started in terms of how we're tightening up some of our cross-departmental alignment and how we're really being intentional about having every office in the academics division really talking about the work, really collaborating, and really making sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what we're expecting schools to do.
May I ask a quick question? I'm looking at this slide here, and there's so many acronyms. I figured out a couple of them, but OSSS, OTL,
Sure.
and OSP.
Sure. OSSS is Office of Student Support Services under Chief Martinick.
Okay.
OTL is Office of Teaching and Learning under Dr. Valentino. And OSP is Office of School Performance, currently serving double duty Dr. Cuellar under the Chief of Schools.
Thank you.
So can I just follow on? So I'm sorry. The MTSS, it looks like it's being used here as a team versus the actual system. I'm looking at the last bullet point. I'm not sure I understand how it's being used in this context.
Oh, okay.
MTSS has organized the district.
Sure.
Is it being used as like the MTSS team, or
Sure, I can
who's
explain
organized?
that. Yeah, this is organized into 2 cohorts. Approximately half of the schools fell into each group. The first cohort are all the schools that are CSI, TSI, and Title I together, about 40 schools. And they are getting the initial big blast of support and training this year, and a phase-in of the other schools that are cohort 2 will begin their training next year. And this includes 6 days of training with nationally recognized experts through Solution Tree on the whole umbrella of school supports that make it possible for students to learn, and the safe environment, a welcoming climate, equity. That's all part of the MTSS umbrella.
I see your question, though, Director Brim-Edwards, about the way that's phrased. And it's not a team, it's a function. But what I think it means to say is, the district has organized itself around to do the MTS work in 2 cohorts with half of the schools in each cohort.
I'm just confused because it seems like it's used as a proper noun here.
Right, and to clarify even further, and I think this was illustrating in terms of just the alignment across multiple offices.
Okay.
Because to your point, the work does touch multiple offices, and this was kind of used as an example in terms of how we're de-siloing the work.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification.
It's like, huh. It's like, it's a noun, it's a verb.
Okay, on this slide, the setting the conditions, it shows the 4 conditions that are coming together under Deputy Superintendent Cuellar's leadership to improve our district-wide coherence and structures and supports for schools. The first is organizational structure. Our primary school support system is led by our 3 regional superintendents, each of whom oversees the work of area senior directors. The second is leadership development. And this is some key elements here. Throughout the year, we provide full-day institutes for school and district leaders. and area senior directors lead their own monthly sessions for their own cohort of school leaders. PPS is partnering with some organizations that are recognized as leaders in leadership development with a strong lens for racial equity and social justice. The third condition is cross-department alignment. District leaders are grouped in teams to focus support to specific schools under each area senior director, as Dr. Cuellar mentioned, our lab teams. There are recurring meetings each month for cross-department leaders to streamline and coordinate their initiatives. And the fourth condition is resource differentiation. Our CSI schools are staffed to have lower staff-to-student ratios and are assigned permanent substitute teachers to provide greater classroom continuity when there is an unfilled sub-opening. And schools receive FTE for equity based on factors such as socioeconomic factors and historically underrepresented groups. As algorithm, it includes those factors and determines the differentiation of equity funds per school. Do you want to click?
Are you gonna, can I ask a question before you? Is that okay? Question before. The slide back.
Oh, back one?
Yeah. I love the way this is organized because I think it gives a sense of like the different buckets of support for our students and schools. Just maybe a question, and maybe now is not the time, maybe it's a budget question, but the equity FTE, the question about whether the amount of additional FTE that they receive, whether it's enough to achieve equitable outcomes, versus it's more than the other schools, and that being the measurement, versus is it enough? Do we think it's enough that, and I know the answer might be different at each school, but I'm wondering if we analyze the gap, like if, and maybe this is part of the Student Success Act of, here's what we think, here's what we do right now, it's a whatever X percent bump in FTE, and here's what we think we actually need in order to get more equitable outcomes?
That doesn't have an easy answer.
I know.
Because this is exactly the conversation that our principal supervisors are having with our school leaders, and as they engage and track the conversations and the work and the strategies in play in their school improvement efforts and in their plans as articulated there, it's how do we leverage the resources we have available to optimize the conditions for students. So yes, I don't think there's a school in PPS that couldn't stand to do with more resources, but in particular, we want to make sure and prioritize our underserved school communities. And yes, we have an opportunity ahead of us, which is why you're getting a little bit of a preview of coming attractions about how you will see us creating a blueprint for how to differentiate supports and resources to our schools. You saw that list. We don't want to see that number of schools appearing on anybody's list other than for exemplary purposes. But this slide does give you a little bit of a landscape about how the team cross-departmentally thinks about all aspects that need to be in place and fortified. And so if we have some resources that we can leverage or have some discretion around, how do we think about that long list of schools and working with each principal, sort of prioritize where they need it most this school year, understanding that as we learn more and as we get around that circle, that plan, do, study, act continuous improvement cycle, we'll get much more accurate in sort of the supports and interventions that we can put into play for the coming school year, that hopefully in the spring we'll be able to tell them in advance so that they can plan intentionally for professional development or academic or social supports for our students, or a PD plan or a partner or an after-school program or extended learning in the summer, or any one of a long menu of interventions. We're not short of ideas, but that makes sense for that school community.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Director Scott.
You may have just answered the clarifying question I had. I was surprised at a couple of the schools on the list, and reading through the the memo, the targeted schools for improvement schools can be there even if just a subgroup, right, is not meeting those benchmarks, which just brought to mind then your TSI schools, it seems, can span a pretty big can have a pretty big span, but you could have a group with, you know, a large subgroup that's not meeting those. You could also have a school with a very small subgroup. And I'm assuming what you are just describing is the area directors and principals are looking to target resources accordingly. So it's not a formula that if you're TSI, you get this amount of resources. We're looking across the district. Yes.
Like good medical professionals, we want to have a clear diagnosis and be very targeted about sort of how to cure and support those. So this is why, yes, the list might be longer, but Director Scott, you're correct. It might be a subgroup of 12 students from a particular student population where the intervention is going to look very different depending on which student group isn't meeting those expectations. And that's the conversation that we're engaged in with our school communities.
I think it's really important to draw attention to that because our traditional model of funding has been based on the overall population of a school. And so I think it's so important that we are really focusing in on, in some of these TSI schools, in my neighborhood, there's one that is a population that's probably about a dozen kids, but they really need help. And so to elevate that, to really make sure that that's very small subgroup of kids gets what they need is, I think, really important.
So I can't find the memo right now, but the question I had about the class size, thank you, Director Consim. There was a class size chart or maximum class size, and it's that in the TSI and or CSI and title schools are using different ratios. So does that mean so that the maximum class sizes were frozen at the 18-19 ratio versus going up slightly like the rest of the district did? Does that mean we have a policy of not paying stipends, or we're actually in the CSI and title schools actually keeping the class sizes less than that amount and not using, which is the other mechanism, which is to pay the stipend for the overage?
So it's true that some schools, when they have a slightly better class size, that might make them below the number where the teacher would be eligible for overage pay. Is that what you're referencing?
No, I guess I'm saying in this chart it says one of our strategies to provide additional supports is to have a maximum class size that's lower than all the other non-TSI and title schools. And so the question is, are they actually having that as a maximum class sizes, or is that the policy, or are we in some cases using stipends and allowing the class sizes to be over even though they're...
No, we are very cognizant of that, and we are, the way we're looking at how we are looking at class sizes, we actually prioritize our CSI schools first. I'm going to use an example from Lent, and looking just at kindergarten alone. In their kindergarten numbers, I believe in their classes, they had probably, I think, 13 students in each class. So an example of that, when we're looking in terms of how we are providing support to, let's say, kindergarten classes that are over, we are not going to actually take a teacher away from a CSI school. We're going to allow those numbers to stay as they are, which is a 1 to a 13 or a 1 to a 14 ratio, which is to that point. We are prioritizing those schools first and foremost. We made it very clear that we are not altering the class sizes to be able to provide critical support to overages in other areas.
But that would not be, just to Director Scott's point, it would not be to the TSI schools, which may have a much smaller targeted population versus the CSI schools or the title schools.
Yeah, of course, we're observing all our contractual agreements. The class size is one in a long list of tactics or interventions that we can employ. You just heard an example where, it may make sense, maybe it doesn't make sense. Maybe there's a different kind of support that's more critical. So I think it's just this notion of differentiating our school improvement efforts to the actual needs of the school is what we're trying to get real clarity about. And so calibrating ourselves as at the central office, at the school level, at the classroom level is what sort of we're aspiring to do here, and getting very institutionalized about how a district reacts to a school that is underserving any group of students. And so we're very much in the early stages of sort of really institutionalizing that kind of an approach, which you're getting a little bit of a glimpse of that you can look forward to hearing much more about.
But it is prioritized, and when we're looking at FTEs, it's through a prioritized lens.
I think the other thing that's worth commenting on is that all of this restructuring and this reallocation of resources has occurred after the budgeted process. And so it's a very significant shifting, and artful, I might say, shifting of resources, and I think fundamentally just much more student-centered.
This is why sometimes not getting too overly prescriptive and line-itemed about some of our resources, because there needs to be some flexibility to adjust along with the improvement needs of our schools. So, so thank you for making that plug. I second it.
So just one last question on the lower left quadrant. So I love the focus on leadership and the work happening in that area. And a question I would have is whether stability and like retention of school leaders in schools that are undergoing school improvement, significant school improvement efforts, whether that's a focus, and if so, like what's our strategy? We had a fair amount of change, and knowing the value that brings to a school community to have continuity is there. It may be there.
There's a lot of layers to that question there, whether retention and stability and how those play out in our improvement. Dr. Cuellar might offer a more diplomatic response.
Sure, absolutely. So that's a very good question. I think one of our critical responses to that is just how we're evolving, based off of what the reality is in our schools. As the board knows, the superintendent and I restructured and reorganized the Office of School Performance this past summer to really meet the needs in terms of some of those critical gaps. Part of the reorganization was actually lowering the span of control for the principal supervisor to the principal ratio. Before, the average area senior director was supervising close to 18 schools. So what we did is we reorganized to lower that span of control, so none of my senior directors are supervising more than 13 schools now. And in addition to that, we've also we added a cohort specific to our CSI schools, where before they were actually separated amongst a variety of different leaders and cohorts. Now they're concentrated in one cohort, and also that group is also under the leadership of Keely Simpson, which we have no plans in changing that formula moving forward, because we need to start establishing some stability in terms of the leadership and the continuity. Does in turn, to your point, which we know will have a ripple effect in terms of expectations specific to our principals in our schools in need of improvement. Also, Director Brim-Edwards, we are also really mindful that our CSI and TSI principals are going to need a very prescribed type of professional development, because it is not, to work in a school in need of drastic improvement really requires a different skill set and schema than it does in a traditional environment. And so that's something that we are cognizant of. And that's part of the work that the entire division is working on, but specific Dr. Simpson and Oscar, who is working with those group of principals. Those group of principals actually have a very different prescribed plan of support and development than the other principals do in the organization. And if there's any questions around what that looks like in more granular detail, Dr. Simpson and I can definitely get something out to the board so you understand what that looks like. Also, to wrap it up, we're also conscious around our pipeline efforts. We have to start developing our leadership early. We need to start identifying those highly effective teachers to become, to become our assistant principals or our coaches, and then start identifying some of our assistant principals early on and start developing that skill set and schema to start becoming, our highly effective leaders. And that's something that we're doing in partnership right now with the Office of Professional Learning as well as the Office of Human Resources, and how we're starting to develop a pathway initiative program that's going to start making very, very conscientious efforts in terms of developing our bench much earlier than later. And that was something that we identified last year, where the superintendent discussed with the board that we have so many vacancies that come up, but then when we're tapped out after 8 hires of folks that are internal, we have to do better. And that's something that the team has really been working hard on this year, is establishing some of those different pathway options and professional development opportunities for our own internal staff so we can start building our internal capacity.
I appreciate all the management level questions, but I think to put it, in summary, is we want to make sure that when we have a clear sense of where a school is in its improvement journey, that we're matching the profile leader with the skill competencies in those areas with that school community. And so that's part of the system work, is to make sure that we're equipping our leaders to lead schools for which they're prepared to lead that next chapter. And it is true that the leadership development plan that then has to be in play for either a network of like schools or for that specific principal is the day-to-day work of our principal supervisors, and those are the conversations while we think long-term around what we recognize here, not just in Portland, but in Oregon generally, around the ed leadership pipelines that are sorely lacking. And so how do we think about creating those partnerships and opportunities so our leaders are equipped and have the supports, and that we continue to provide those so that our leaders are successful.
I think also, like, looking at this slide, which is so dense with so many strategies and interventions, this is so important for us as a foundation for our SSA conversations, because we know this is the work that we want to address with our Student Success Act additional dollars. And every single one of these bullet points on here translates to FTE and investments in our schools. And it's incredible to go into one of our highest need schools now and already be able to see more adults in the building and see the ability to, like, pull small groups of kids out and, with literacy coaches, and to see what each one of those interventions looks like. But, I would posit that each one of these things is, like, central to what we should be talking about with our SSA conversations.
So this is the point in the festivities where I feel compelled to do my little budget rant. The SSA money, we are grateful for every nickel, but it is not a life-changing amount of money that we're getting. And if you've been paying attention to what everybody has been saying tonight, public comment here, everybody wraps up with, and now we have money, except we don't. We're going to get $39 million for SSA. We may get some additional money from non-competitive and competitive grants, the duration of which I think is still unclear. The criteria for being chosen, I think, are still unclear. The only thing we can really count on is, we hope, $39 million, which is, I'll say it again, not a life-changing amount of money. So if we're going to do all of this, we're going to have to be using our general fund money, and a lot of it. So it worries me, it concerns me greatly that the narrative within Oregon is that in terms of K-12 budget, we're done, we're fixed, everything's cool, because now we're close to QEM, we're good, let's move on to the next crisis. We're not done. This is a down payment after 30 years of disinvestment in public education. So, end of rant, thank you.
Proceed.
And if I could interject,
This rant was brought to you by...
It's why we started off that initial slide with the concentric circles, because tonight our objective was to give you an update on our ESSA reporting. but you're getting a glimpse of some of the strategies and tactics that we use in supporting our CSI and TSI schools. We are clear that our Student Success Act is pointedly intended to address particularly racial equity gaps and underserved students. So some of those pockets of students, many of them, won't surprise you, overlap with the list of CSI and TSI schools. There will be others. And those monies will be dedicated to many of those priority areas that we've been discussing. But Director Moore brings up the good point. These are good school improvement strategies no matter where you go to campus. And so the bigger investment is in how we talk about the general fund over the next several years and how we drive district improvement and academic acceleration towards those goals. And so what you're getting tonight is, yes, this is a compliance report, but we see it as just sort of the appetizer for the main entree that's coming. And you won't see coming from the team 3 different sets of tactics depending on the plan or the revenue source. And so we're using this moment as an instructional moment to talk a little bit more about what goes into our day-to-day thinking as we work with our school leaders.
Okay, and this slide elaborates a bit on our differentiation strategies. And you'll see the top box, the all schools. This is where they're participating in lab team visits, ongoing professional development with their cohort principals, and also recurring visits from their area senior director. So that's for all of our schools. The next one down, TSI and or Title I schools, they receive more frequent area senior director visits and improvement science training to guide the development of their school improvement plans. And all Title I schools also have the lower class size staffing ratios. And then finally, for our CSI schools, they get all the supports of the earlier boxes, and additionally, they also have department heads from BESC on their lab teams, and we have weekly visits from the area senior director, and they have been assigned permanent substitute teachers and extra PD days in the school year, as well as additional partnership this year initiated this year for transformational leadership development.
Clarify how this designation of permanent subs relates to our budget designation before of site support instructors? And is it?
Yes, it's the same.
Is it the same and the same number, or more have been added, or?
13 altogether.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And do we still have, is that enough, or do we still have a lot of unfilled absences in our highest need schools?
Yes, it's still true.
Yeah.
It's a help, but it does not solve the problem.
So I'm just kind of curious about that. I was going to ask a similar question. Because I don't know what the patterns are across the district of, is it just every building every day has at least, 1.3, staff out? And I'm curious about the data, just whether we're, I think from talking to teachers and principals in schools where they have, chronic shortage or staffing and not subs to cover it, it seems like a great solution. I'm thinking back to like the root cause though. Are we actually seeing greater number of subs in a need for greater number of subs in those schools, or is it like the same as everywhere else? It's just the need is much more critical in those schools to make sure you have a sub in every classroom, or we're less likely to get subs in those schools?
We're less likely to get subs in those schools. They have, if you were to do a cross diagram of our schools that are CSI, Title I, TSI, with the number of unfilled sub positions, you would see a tight correlation. Some of our schools would rarely have an unfilled sub position ever.
But it's not because they don't need subs, it's just they don't have unfilled positions.
Yes, they get people take those offers. Yes.
So I would say the predecessor question really is, are the conditions supportive enough that we don't have a large number of staff absences to begin with, right? But when conditions in some of our underserved school communities are challenging, this is what we're trying to mitigate through some of the supports, because it's not just a sub-fill rate question, it's why do we have the number of staff absences we have across the district?
So in order to get the additional supports and training that the folks would need. Sometimes that's also a piece of when do you go and get the additional support and training, which would require a sub. So there's a couple of things at play here.
I also want to put in the plug too. Sharon's team has been doing a lot of work too in terms of how we're reimagining of how to bolster the substitutes. Our focus on our substitute professionals in our school system, and I just wanted to put a plug in there because I know that the Office of Human Resources has been really working hard around that in terms of how we are enhancing their professional development opportunities and making sure that they themselves feel like they are actually a part of the system. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Human Resources Department that's been doing a really good concentrated effort on that work, which we know is part of it, but also what the superintendent said is the conditions in a building as well as the culture and the climate in the school is ultimately going to drive what is happening with the Capitol and the building.
Another question. I was just reminded again today that we have co-located schools that are essentially two schools in one building, and the neighborhood strand often would absolutely qualify, at least as Title I, and if not CSI, TSI, but as a school community, they're not on the list, and that's a problem we need to address.
Does that conclude your remarks?
One more. Hey, well, I got one more. On this slide, and this slide is a nice quick summary. It just shows an overview of our school improvement, the school-specific improvement plans that all schools have developed, and they must identify data-based goals in the three areas of reading, mathematics, and culture climate. So all schools are expected to have that consistent topics that they make goals in. The high school goals are more focused on closing gaps in graduation rates and readiness for life beyond high school, and focusing on their historically underserved students. OSP leaders facilitate sessions to guide principals in analyzing their school data and developing goals and priority action steps based on their data points, using the improvement science model. And OSP also reviews all the school improvement plans, that drafts that are as they are sent into us, and we provide specific feedback to all the principals and coach them to help them maximize the potential of their plan to actually realize positive student impact.
Are these plans available on our website?
No, they're not, but we absolutely can provide those plans if you're interested. I know we shared a couple of those plans earlier today. So this is part of if there's any particular interest in any building or any specific school, we can absolutely get those plans to you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? So I'm familiar, sort of, with improvement science as applied in healthcare and PDSA cycles, Plan to Study Act. Can you give us an example of a PDSA cycle or in a school context?
Sure. One example we see
Quickly.
frequently we're seeing in schools, they're looking at, I think it's PDSA cycle as opposed to more of a traditional quicker model, was to say, this group of students, we only have 30% of our students meeting standards in math. Let's just offer more math time. They assume too superficially what the solution is. The PDSA cycle causes us to go more deeply and really get at the root cause. That's the big thing that might have been missing before. And they're looking at that. Then what are some possible change ideas to directly impact where we see the root cause to affect that? And then it's also part of this concept of improvement science is a quick cycle of trying a quick strategy with a small group and see if it works, and then expand to scale if it's working well. If not, abandon that and try something else that might work.
Or just adjust.
Yeah. So I think for a number of schools, they might have previously have said, we're just going to have more pull-out groups for math. So they might have, as they had gone through the PDSA cycle and found the root cause, they really found that it was their instructional strategies that were not reaching the students versus just having more time. It's what's happening in the time versus how much time. in some cases. So in that case, and they also found sometimes what they're teaching very effectively, but they're teaching to a standard that is not tested, or it's not really at the right grade level. So the students might be acing a classroom test on a third grade level, but they're in fourth grade. So it's looking at specifically what are they being taught and assessed on, and what are the instructional strategies to engage the kids. So that would be part of their strategies and plans to change the idea to improve that. And if they're not seeing it by the next cycle, maybe like the MAP assessment test, they should be seeing growth for the specific kids they're targeting. And assuming they do, then they continue that. If not, they look at adjusting to see why is it, again, do the root cause, aren't we getting there? So that's one that I think is very common.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's the heart of our work. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump the agenda down to item 9 regarding Harriet Tubman and the Rose Quarter Improvement Project. In March 2019, following a presentation from the Oregon Department of Transportation on the Rose Quarter I-5 Improvement Project, the PPS Board of Education passed a resolution urging ODOT to move forward with a full environmental impact statement to fully resolve questions around the potential impacts of the project on PPS students. Since then, the project team has convened a group of elected leaders and staff, as well as community stakeholders, to discuss the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project in the Albina neighborhood. To date, this group has met 5 times and made no substantial progress to substantially address issues raised by Portland Public Schools and the Albina Vision to offer alternatives to the current plan. At this time, the leadership of the Oregon Transportation Commission has indicated that it plans to unilaterally take action at its December 17 public meeting without addressing any of the troubling and significant impacts that the widening will have on students and community health. Tonight, we will vote on a resolution that states our opposition to ODOT's efforts to move ahead with the I-5 north of Rose Quarter expansion in Albina without conducting a full environmental impact statement and without addressing the long-term health and environmental issues at Harriet Tubman Middle School caused by the I-5 freeway. The board will now consider Resolution 6008, PPS comments on the status of Oregon Department of Transportation's I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Director Scott moves and Director Bermedward seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 6008. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment on Resolution 6008?
No.
There is not. Is there any board discussion on this resolution?
Yeah, I have two questions on it. And in your intro, you mentioned letter K of the resolution notes that the Oregon Transportation Commission has privately stated that it plans to unilaterally take action. How do we know?
Director Bailey and I.
Your microphone is on.
Because Director Bailey and I were at the meeting in which that was shared. It was also on the written agenda at the meeting.
Okay, so my only question, the phrase privately stated in a government resolution struck me as odd.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually, because it sounds like they haven't publicly stated, but actually you just indicated at a meeting they did state it. So, and I actually liked, Chair Constam sort of said they indicated, and I wonder if that's a better word to use rather than privately stated.
I think that's a more accurate description because I think 3/4 of the room were elected officials.
But was it in a public meeting? Was it a?
It wasn't. It was not in a public meeting. There wasn't a quorum of any of those elected
I
bodies.
think we can have a friendly amendment.
Okay,
to
and
change
I don't want to
privately
quibble too much
stated
over
to
it, but
indicated.
it just jumped out at me
I
when I
think
read it.
that's probably a better description.
Okay, so maybe I'll make a motion to change in letter K, the OTC, instead of privately stated, just the OTC has indicated that it plans to unilaterally take action.
Yes.
Great. Oh, and I made a motion. So do we need to?
Second.
And is it second?
Director Scott moves, Director Lowry seconds an amendment on the language in item K and resolution 6008.
Do we need to vote on that before we move forward?
All in favor of this modest amendment, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The amendment passes at a vote of 7-0 with Representative Latterell voting. How do you feel about indicated?
Versus privately stated.
Okay.
My second question, which is it's maybe a little more substantive, but clarifying under the resolution in the second bullet. I don't have any opposition to this, but it felt as though it put the responsibility on us. So it says the Board of Education will work with Albina Vision to understand the environmental and health impacts of the freeway on our students and develop initiatives that mitigate that impact on students. And I think I understand what we're trying to say is that we're going to work with community partners to understand, but it almost felt as though we were taking on the responsibility for understanding the environmental health impacts, but I think the purpose of the resolution is to ask for an environmental impact analysis.
So the purpose of the resolution, because the question may be asked, like, why are we repassing a very similar resolution to what we had passed before? And I think when we passed the resolution last spring, there hadn't been any discussions at that time. And since then, there have been a number of discussions with the Oregon Department of Transportation leadership and the Oregon Transportation Commission leadership, and most recently, their indication that they were going to move ahead, and all indications was that they were backing away from an environmental impact statement. So this is a restatement of that, the earlier board statement, to just put the Oregon Transportation Commission on notice that we feel strongly about it. I think one thing that, and Director Baylor, I would invite you to add to this as well, is one thing sort of at the table is, while we're not responsible for coming up with the mitigation or understanding, I think we have a pretty good a sense of the impact, not just of this expansion. I think that this is an important concept, not just the expansion, but the actual freeway just being there. But it is going to be, I think, incumbent upon PPS and our community partners to really push for alternatives, because in the absence of that, I think the Oregon Department of Transportation will what they know how to do is build and expand roadways, frankly. And so while it's not our sole responsibility, I think we're going to have to actively engage to get them to think of more innovative ways of addressing the issue that they, not just from this expansion, but also from the freeway just cutting right through Albina, and for PPS already very close to our school.
Director Bailey?
Yes, and it's already cost us well over $10 million, the original freeway. And even more important than that, probably a lot of long-term health impacts to residents and students who are close to I-5.
Director Moore? Oh, I'm sorry. Finish.
Well, I'm fine with saying indicated rather than privately communicated, but I think the private communication was in reference to, it's one thing to have one or two quiet meetings before going forward, and this dragged out into 3, 4, 5 basically private meetings of business that should be in the public view. So that's a little bit behind that language.
Director Moore?
In response to Director Scott's comments, can I propose a friendly amendment?
Sure.
Of language? In the second bullet point, the Board of Education for Portland Public Schools will work in partnership with Albina Vision Trust to urge ODOT to pursue an environmental impact statement in order to understand the, and we could quibble over the verb. We could urge, we could demand, we could request. Pick your verb.
In order to develop, so it picks back up, understand. So can you read?
And actually, before, can I just ask, because I do think we cover that in bullet number 1, because we say that we oppose the effort to move forward without conducting a full EIS. Where I was going, and just put it on the table, I actually thought Director Brim Edwards' comments and context are helpful. Having us as a board, as part of this conversation, as part of our official minutes and on the record, saying bullet number 2 is not PPS saying we're going to take this responsibility on. Bullet number 2 is simply saying we are going to work with community partners to fully understand the impact and as Director Broom-Edwards said, work to advocate to mitigate those impacts. I'm comfortable, having said that, going forward with the resolution as is.
That said,
Okay.
how wedded are you to your amendment?
I'm good.
And you know, to that point, for example, today Speaker Kotek came out in support of an environmental impact statement. So I think that the table needs to be expanded, and certainly, you know, I think at the very beginning, a very true statement. The Oregon Department of Transportation said that, you know, they weren't going to be able to solve this themselves, and I say that they are specialists in building roads, and I really do think ultimately this will be, and hopefully, a solution that we get a better outcome for our students, and also a better plan for Albina that is supported legislatively, and I mean, I think they can be critical partners, because part of the rationale for ODOT moving forward is that we have this mandate that says we need to do this project. And I think today, you know, having the Speaker of the House say there are other
Maybe not,
issues
yeah.
at play here that we need to work with care on is, you know, an important development.
Can
And-
it's, sorry, go ahead. Well, it's also worth noting that right now, we're talking about I-5. At some point, sometime soon, we're also going to be talking about 205 and 82nd and 405 and
26.
and Powell, and I mean, all of these major arterials have schools very close to them. So this is going to be the gift that keeps on giving. And I think it's important that we kind of make it very clear that it's not just this particular interest. Yeah. This is the, you know, the burning issue right now, but this is a much broader question that we have views on, and we're going to stand by them, and we're going to mobilize if necessary.
And while this resolution is fairly narrowly focused on the impacts on our students at Tubman, within the context that our students keep reminding us of the world is on fire, I have to question the wisdom of spending $500 million on some cosmetic freeway, what amount to be cosmetic freeway improvements, when we need to be completely rethinking our transportation system.
Director DePass?
I was just going to say it's probably, following on what Director Moore said, a great time for maybe the policy committee to work on a district-wide policy that addresses the health impacts of, you know, increased transportation, you know, within a certain distance of our schools.
Thank you.
Not to give work away, but I think it would be, you know, live in the policy committee.
Yeah. Okay, let's call the question. The board will now vote on Resolution 6008. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6008 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Latterell voting.
Yes.
All right. Okay, thank you very much, particularly Director Bailey and Director Broom-Edwards for really bird dogging this issue for us. So we're going to jump back up to our conversation. Excuse me. So we're going to jump back up to our conversation about adoption of the superintendent's evaluation goals. And I'm going to ask Director Scott to introduce and lead this discussion. And thank you for your work
Great.
in bringing this template to us.
Yes, happy to do so. And I know I just derailed that last one for about 10 minutes. And you know how much I love to stay on schedule. And we are scheduled to get out of here at 8:35. We are scheduled for 20 minutes on this, and I am so confident in this board's ability to have a 20-minute conversation about this. I think we're going to make it. So I'm going to be brief, and then we're going to go through. I am going to be brief, but we're going to make it.
Dog year 20 minutes?
I am so confident. Just watch. So a little bit of context for community members or those watching. So what we're talking about here tonight is the superintendent's performance evaluation template. It is not the performance evaluation. That'll come at the end of the school year. But as part of best practice, board sets out a template usually at the beginning of the school year, so this would usually be late summer, laying out the goals that the board has for the district, for the superintendent for the year. This year, we're adopting this later, primarily because we spent a good chunk of that summer and fall working on the district's goals. And so you've already seen those goals tonight in an earlier presentation. The board has adopted those 4 goals, and we wanted that process to happen before the superintendent's evaluation template was put together. Now that process has happened and we had a significant amount of meeting time and input on the goals. We also had a board work session to talk specifically about how those goals relate to the superintendent's performance template. And then we asked the superintendent to put together a draft of those goals for the 1920 year. So again, we're already maybe almost 50% of the way through the year. And what we have and what we're considering today is a little bit of a hybrid document. So the evaluation template includes the 4 goals that are adopted by the board for the district overall. And it also includes 5 leadership standards that are set out by the Oregon School Boards Association. The Oregon School Boards Association, OSBA, actually has 9 different leadership standards that they say that districts can use in order to rate their superintendent's performance. Superintendent Guru has pulled 5 of those out and said these would be the priorities for him for this year. Those include visionary leadership, communications and community relations, curriculum planning and development, resource management, and labor relationships. And what the template lays out are essentially those 5 leadership standards along with the goals, and it has some criteria that we will use at the end of the year in terms of whether the superintendent has been effective, accomplished, developing, et cetera, and whether we've achieved those goals as a district. So that's the overall context. We sent this out last week, which is a relatively short turnaround time, but I think given a lot of the public input to this point, we're still hoping to move forward pretty quickly, and given where we are in the school year as well. I had a chance to get have some conversations with most of the board in terms of this, and there were a couple of issues that came to the fore that I think there was generally a desire to have a discussion on tonight. So I'm going to sort of tee those up a little bit and then open it up for other board members to put other issues on the table. And then again, hoping to adopt this as soon as the board feels comfortable moving forward with it. One of the issues that came up from a number of different board members was ensuring that we have a really explicit focus on racial equity in this document. It is incorporated in each one of our district goals, and I think very clearly so. So I think, and as we adopted that was something we were really focused on. So I think it's clear there. But in the OSBA leadership standards, it shows up, but not as directly and concretely as I think as Portland Public Schools has often called it out. And so I heard that from a number of people, and it was something that I thought of as well in terms of ways that we can incorporate racial equity into the document. And actually, Director DePass had a really good suggestion in terms of where we might be able to include racial equity. And so maybe you want to talk about that for a minute?
So my feedback, I had 2 pieces of feedback. One of them was on the racial equity. Director Scott said that there was kind of an implicit, focus on racial equity in the performance goals. But I wanted to see some more direct language in the leadership standards, language such as in the visionary leadership position, something to the effect of promotes and demonstrates cultural competence, actively promotes welcoming, inclusive environment, and has some performance outcomes tied to those things. If we want to address racial equity at the district, we have to be very explicit with our language. And this would be a good place to start. A comment on the OSBA. The conference just happened. I wasn't able to attend the full conference, but they are not leading on racial equity. I don't want to elevate them. That organization is, they're not necessarily using best practices in their own organization, and so while they helped, contribute to this template, I don't want to follow their lead necessarily because they're not leading in this area.
So are you suggesting that we could add something under the visionary leadership first standard, which says the superintendent is an educational leader who integrates principles of cultural competency and equitable practice and promotes the success of every student by facilitating the development, articulation, implementation, and stewardship of a vision of learning that is shared and supported by all? Are you suggesting that we add?
I'm suggesting that we add under the sub-bullets, there's 1.5 to add, or consider adding a 1.6 that says something to the effect, and I'm happy to wordsmith this, promotes and demonstrates cultural competence.
And can I, just as a suggestion?
And, yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
And, or actively promotes a welcoming and inclusive environment.
And
I'm suggesting that we add 2 sub-bullets under visionary leadership.
Director DePass, I'm wondering if there's something more all-encompassing, if we're talking about a 1.6, which I think it makes sense here under this goal, something that says makes progress on Portland Public Schools' racial equity strategy, and I'm wondering if making progress on the racial equity strategy is broad enough. That's something that's already been adopted by the district.
How do we measure that?
May I pause this conversation for a moment to ask Danny Ledesma to come forward, because my charades skills are not quite good enough to understand what you're so urgently trying to be helpful with there.
And if I'm understanding, board chair is asking staff to come inform the superintendent's evaluation. And I think what she is going to say
Be careful.
is that we do have some racial equity, social justice competency areas, and since I'm hearing that that's an interest of the boards in rewriting OSBA's leadership standards, that we do have some anchor documents that we can point to that we utilize in our work. Do you want to elaborate?
Sure. So as part of the work that we've been doing around our racial equity plan and framework, the Chief Human Resources Officer and our Senior Director of Professional Learning and Development and I developed the Professional Development Framework that lists out the competencies that we would like all PPS employees to aspire to. And we have great language that you could anchor and be aligned in, and our superintendent's leadership team, our superintendent have all kind of like reviewed and sort of given the heads up, and all of our professional development in racial equity and social justice is aligned towards these competencies. So I just wanted to humbly offer this as a resource as you were thinking about the things. And it's on our website under the plan, and it's the professional development framework.
Would you recommend that we add that as a separate, well, I guess that's a conversation for us to have as a board, is do we add that framework as a separate 6th goal, or do we incorporate those pieces of the framework into each of the other 5 that are from OSBA?
I'm suggesting that, we all know that work in racial equity, racial equity work, that the leadership position is, it's very important, and that these aspirational, competencies should live in that leadership. I'll take a look at the document again, and I appreciate that, being able to borrow language from, the work that's already been produced.
I think it is embedded in the overall description under visionary leadership. It's also included in communications and community relations, but I think as a sub-bullet point, to be able to incorporate some of our own language from our racial equity framework would be helpful.
My general comment is that I'd like to see language that's a little bit more explicit, because that's best practices. If we name it in the document, and then we can track it, and it looks like it's important to us.
And so a friendly amendment to the equity issues that Director DePass has already raised. I also think another point would be the sort of recruitment and retention of a diversified staff, which
Yes.
I think every throughout the vision process, whenever I go talk to students at our high schools, that is one of their biggest issues, of having a staff that's more reflective of their student body.
Absolutely, and more reflective of, the communities that we serve. I feel like, yes, hiring more teachers and administrators of color is something that we do want to track, and we do want to, we do want to put our attention there, and we do want to write it down.
And I want to jump in here because I think it's important as we have this conversation. Am I still on? Yeah. There's a danger that we're going to start getting very deep into very specific things about, hiring more teachers of color, administrators of color, rather than focusing on what are sort of the racial equity goals for the district, and then evaluating the superintendent on all of those things at the end of the year. And so that's why I want to try and keep the language at a high level, and avoid sort of this. Because again, we could start listing 10 of these things that we want to see. We already have those goals and strategies.
And so where are those though that we can directly link to, and that, because in fairness to the superintendent, he's going to need to know what exactly it is. So if we're pointing to the draft racial equity plan that was rolled out last month, if that's what we want to keep at high level and link it to, then we just need to be explicit that that's what we're linking it to.
Director Brim-Edwards, I'm not understanding why 7.2 isn't sufficient for what you're asking, which is identifies and applies appropriate policies, criteria, and processes for the recruitment, selection, induction, compensation, and separation of personnel. And we could add, retention.
Well, I had resource management coming out, because if I...
So
that's
I was going to make exactly that point, that we could rework the language on 7.2. Well, that brings me back to the point that I shared with everybody, is that these are boilerplate OSBA, and that the 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, and so on don't necessarily show up in, what makes accomplished versus effective. So when we get around to doing evaluation, I would like to see alignment. So I'm willing to go with this framework in general, and have a subcommittee of us get more refined around the specific criteria, so that we're clear and the superintendent's clear. But are we back to you saying, well, actually, we want to be at a higher level?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, honestly, from my perspective, I don't think we want to continue working on this. Well, no, through the rest of the year. Tonight we'll talk about process in a second, but I really think from a performance evaluation standpoint, you're right. The one approach is to give the superintendent, 50 different target goals, some of which are district-wide, some of which are focused. But I don't think that's the most effective way when we're talking about these leadership standards. I actually found this to be a good document because of its flexibility, that I thought it was clear in terms of what it was looking for, but it allows for some room as each of us go through this at the end of the year, which is what we'll be doing, to sort of look and say, based on the superintendent's self-evaluation, do we really think it hit the mark or not? And I worry the more specific we get.
I feel like the toe has been dipped in once these 5 are on the docket, that we're back into leaning in towards micromanagement, and that's going to be by having these 5 on there, where it's a slippery slope.
Do you not support including the OSBA leadership goals with our student achievement board goals?
I think it gets us, the potential is there, and we have struggled with this. This has been a weakness of this board. The evaluation processes have not been very good. And I'm afraid that we're setting ourselves up for another. We get to May, and it's a Rorschach test where we're all looking at the same thing, and somebody's seeing an elephant, and somebody's seeing a penguin, or a hammer.
And I think what I would say, and if you go back to the OSBA criteria around this as well, they're very clear. That is on us as a 7-member board to figure out, and we figure that out when we're doing the evaluation, and we figure it out in executive session, and it is very, very important that we speak with one voice, which means that there may be people who had a different viewpoint, but when the evaluation itself comes out, we're speaking with one voice. And I think this gets back to our Harvard Leadership Summit. I mean, all of those things about how we work effectively as a board. It really has less to do, I think, with the superintendent's performance, that we're willing to come together and come to a consensus, even if we're not all getting what we want.
I agree. These evaluations have been almost more about us than about the superintendent, and in not a very good way.
So I'm going to
Wait, Director Lowry had a.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So I would, the place where I am is I thought these were very good, except for the part that Director DePas called out, that there is not the explicit equity language that is part of what we've kind of set as one of our benchmarks of how we operate as a district. And it's just funny to me that the first one has principles of cultural competency called out in the initial statement, but that's not reflected in any of the 5 bullet points below that. So it's sort of like it's not works through the document in the same way. And the same with, as we talk about like cultural competency and communications, curriculum, it does, I don't think it even mentions it in the curriculum about being culturally responsive curriculum. And then it is mentioned in resource management, but I think retention's missing there. And then the others, labor relations, not so much. But I think I'm in a place where I'd be ready to pass this as our evaluation if we added a little bit more explicit equity language to those goals. That's where I sit tonight. Because I do think, like, performance management wise, we're in, if we, the longer this drags on, if it's January before we pass this and then we're trying to evaluate in May, that's really not us being able to really do our job of governing and monitoring the superintendent's performance.
Well, and also back to our commitment to get better at getting better. I mean, if we're really going to be diligent, we know that this performance evaluation should be largely, if not completely, based on our adopted board goals. Yes. And that's it. And I think we wanted to include some of these OSBA standards because we wanted to have a way to talk about those other management qualities and competencies that are important. But the meat of the matter is alignment with our adopted board goals.
So if we're going to do that, I would consider that the way this has been structured is that the standards are have the same weight as our student performance goals. And I would say that if, as we said last year, and then I think recommitted that we're going to make the pivot to student performance, that we should double weight the student performance measurements versus the management standards or the leadership standards. And that way you still have them as factors as part of the evaluation, but that we do have the preponderance of what the evaluation is based on is the performance metrics. So I guess I want to just address briefly.
I totally do not understand what you just said.
So the way it's set up right now is if you look at the page that has, just in the format, we've almost de-emphasized the student performance metrics. But it's the last page. If you took the 4 goals and said those are double weighted in the overall evaluation versus, because otherwise you actually have more of the standards than you have student performance outcomes, which means the majority of your evaluation is on the standards versus the.
So have those 4 standards each be worth, let's say, 8 points out of the 4-point rubric, and have the 5 standards be 4 points. Is that what you're trying to say?
Right. If you
So that would
If
be
we're going to be having the evaluation primarily anchored in student performance.
right. So that'd be 32 points worth of student performance and 20 points of, yeah, if we're going that way.
So another,
I think having a final summary rating is kind of meaningless.
is what?
Is kind of meaningless at this
Well,
point.
so that would be another way just not have summary rating, but, because then you wouldn't have an issue of what that means.
Superintendent Guerrero, do you have thoughts in terms of whether we should weight the district goals versus the leadership goals?
I do have a lot of thoughts on it, but understanding this is the board's prerogative to come to consensus around, and the board rightfully spent a lot of time thinking about where we want to get to as a performance target for student outcomes, which I think is the right conversation. That's where we want to get to. That's the target. The leadership standards, just as a reminder, is the manner in which leadership is exhibited. And so it's a standard. It's the how you go about it, that work. Because I'm starting to hear directors dip into tactics or strategies. The board can't dictate goals and the strategies it thinks should be employed and then hold the superintendent accountable for those, right? Like, that's inconsistent. And so it is important to sort of distinguish. OSBA does have 9 leadership standards. The board can decide to adopt all 9, as it did last year. It can decide to adopt some number from 0 to 9 to create a more holistic performance instrument if it wants to do that. If it's just concerned with student outcome data, I guess if you think of this superintendent's performance evaluation as an organizational one, which is how we think of it, and we want to think about our teachers and our principals and just numbers and outcomes and how they go about their leadership is less important to you, just understand that could have certain unintended consequences.
Right. So having lived through 2 relatively painful evaluation processes already, I think our collective experience the last 2 years was that the 9 standards that OSBA lays out are not crisp and clean. They're pretty fuzzy. So there's, when we were writing up the last 2 evaluations, what we found was that it was extraordinarily difficult to, there's one category, effective management, and another one, resource management. Well, what is the difference between those 2? And what we found was not much. So, in short, I endorse the idea of not using all 9 and taking a subset. But the other thing I would say is I think there is value in having standards because I think, having lived in this district for a long time, I think how things are done is supremely important. It is what everyone talks about, often to the detriment of actual outcomes. So I think ignoring the how and which are conveyed by the standards, I think is not, how am I going to put this? I don't think it's going to be well received, and I don't think it's going to be satisfying for anybody. In addition to that, if we focused only on the metrics, the quantifiable metrics, how is that different from NCLB that focused solely on test scores? And we all know the insidious impact that had on public education. We're in a people business. I mean, metrics are good, numbers are good, they have their place. But so much of this is about relationships and and teamwork and organizational culture. And that cannot be necessarily conveyed in metrics. So I would argue we really have to have some ability as a board to opine in narrative form about the performance of the superintendent and by extension the organization. There you go.
So that was your endorsement of the leadership standards that we have here. You're fine with the ones that we've chosen and the hybrid of having our metrics based on goals and what we have. I would agree, and with Director Lowry as well.
I'm curious, Superintendent Guru, one of the ones that wasn't chosen when I looked through them, so I agree that standards have value, although I think the performance should be double weighted, just based on what I thought we had agreed to as a board in terms of focusing on student outcomes. But I'm curious about why instructional leadership wasn't one of the standards that you chose, say, in place of resource management. Just given, I think we hired a superintendent to be the instructional leader of the district. So we have curriculum. You have a curriculum, which I thought was a great choice, and communications and community development. But I'm curious about the instructional leadership one, because I think that is one of the most important roles that the superintendent plays.
Sure, that is true, and I haven't stopped and won't stop thinking about how to be an effective instructional leader, and actually I have to think about all 9 leadership standards all the time, and actually I think about a whole other set of leadership standards that aren't necessarily OSBA about the way that I carry myself in my work, which is a constant evolution and work in progress, as any reflective leader hopefully is doing. In this case, you might see resource management in there, and it is the way in which we're thinking about not just money and resources, but also the human capital, and what kind of human capital and what systems may not exist or do we need to build, and how do we make progress on some goals that we actually share. Whether you call it out or not, I have to focus on a diverse workforce and how we create it, and that's a lot of our ongoing conversation right now. But I think resource management was there because we have an opportunity right now in front of us that I think we need to be really strategic about. So Student Success Act has a lot of expectations around it. How we think about a 3-year or multi-year business plan to resource some high leverage strategies. That's an important need to really be deliberate about resources. So whether you choose to have it as a standard that you call out here or not, we're going to do our best to put forward a thoughtful budget proposal. These are 5 that are, we just felt were related to some current work. But you could choose to go with 2 that, you feel as a board better encompass a more sort of holistic view on leadership, and you might choose to add in a little more detail that calls out some of the things that are values of ours, that are values of mine, regardless if they're in my performance evaluation or not. It's the way that we try to do the work around here. Similarly with communications and community relationships, that's in there because it's been a trend in the district to not get that done effectively all the time, and so I wanted to continue to shed some spotlight on that. We are going to continue to work on being more effective in our communications, whether that's a leadership standard here or not. So that's a little bit of an explanation about why these 5. I could say something about all 9 if you wanted me to.
I guess if I were to be ranking the ones, I would insert instructional leadership and maybe prioritize it over resource management. Because again, going to your skill set and what we really need in the top leader of the district. And also prioritize it over resource management and perhaps labor relations, just because fundamentally, if we want to change the trajectory of student performance, it's going to be through instruction and leadership at the very top. So that would just be my preference.
I think Director Bailey's had his hands up.
So let me play devil's advocate around curriculum planning and development.
Actually, can I stop you for a second? And the reason why is we have 2 paths that we can go down as a board. And I just, in the interest of time, and I think in the interest of efficiency, well, and I flew in from Pittsburgh 3 hours ago, so I'm going to hit a wall pretty early tonight. The one path is to really discuss this in terms of go into depth. And I think if we're going to do that, tonight's not the night to do it.
I'm not trying to go into depth.
I know, but
finish up.
We're talking about swapping out some leadership standards and other things. And I think if we're going to do that, we need a work session. And I think if we do that, we need a work session. We need to tell Roseanne before we leave tonight when that work session is, and we need to set aside an hour to an hour and a half to do it. That's a path, and if a majority of the board wants to do that, I will show up at that work session and do it. The other path is to say, this is pretty close. It's not perfect. It never will be perfect. There are some key things. I think we all agree on racial equity. I think we want to talk a little bit more about input from stakeholders. There might be a couple other key things. We can just basically get a sense from the board tonight, make those changes, and just vote on it in the consent agenda 2 weeks from now. But I actually kind of want to take a poll of the board because we could literally talk about this for another hour, and if we're going to do that, it shouldn't be tonight.
Can I?
Well, Director Bailey, go ahead.
So, Standard 5 is on here. It's got 6 suggested bullet points underneath it. I am not equipped to evaluate curriculum development along any of those lines. And I actually teach every once in a while. I wouldn't know how to evaluate the work of the district in any meaningful way except we're doing the GVC, that's a good thing. I've said that for 2 years, that's a good thing.
So let me be clear about process. At the end of the school year, the superintendent provides a self-evaluation that goes through these and says, this is what the district achieved. Mm-hmm. Our role as a board is not to look at this and say, what do we think? It's to basically look at the superintendent's self-evaluation and say, did he hit the mark or did he not hit the mark? So it is a much higher level review than actually determining whether he will tell us based on results, based on internal feedback, et cetera, whether he thinks he hit the mark or didn't hit the mark. And that's the way these executive level.
Well, that's why the student performance indicators, because in theory, if you have an effective curriculum, you're going to see improvements in student performance. I mean but I'm with Director Bailey. I want to answer your question. So my preference is.
You may not be.
Pardon? I may want.
I don't think you know where I am right now.
Okay, well, I thought you weren't going to be judging on curriculum standards.
I'm ready to vote yes and get on with things.
Okay.
Come back with the tweaks in next meeting, consent
so,
agenda.
I'm going to answer your question because if we're not going to have a discussion about the issues, then I do want to have a work session because the reality is we got this last Tuesday and there's elements of it that I think deserve a board discussion because I think having the discussion at the front end avoids misunderstandings at the back end. And that we're clear and we've had an opportunity to discuss it, but we did spend many meetings talking about the performance goals, but the rest, the other things here, we haven't had a board discussion about, and I do think it's important for us to understand. So I have a bunch of more questions to ask, so I could, if we're gonna vote on it tonight, I can go ahead and ask them, or but I'm not ready to just adopt them because I think there's open-ended questions.
And in your view, go ahead.
The other alternative is that we could just adopt the student performance goals and either scrap the leadership standards from OSBA, even though I'm not in favor of that, or just hold that part to a later date.
I think Director Moore's been trying to weigh in for a while.
Sorry, did I?
No, it's fine. So for those of us who have been on the board, so 4 out of the 7 of us, this is at least the 3rd time we're looking at these OSBA standards. So even though we got this draft last Tuesday, it's not like you've never seen these before. This is a cut and paste from the OSBA template. The only thing that is different is that a few of the standards have disappeared. Most of which I think are covered. I mean, there are a couple things I could quibble on, but I'm trying not to quibble. So I think it's also important to note that Superintendent Guerrero has been here for just over 2 years. Right? Correct. This will be his third evaluation. The previous two evaluation instruments that we applied didn't appear until January. And one of them wasn't even adopted until, I think, February. In our defense, I will say that this board, unlike previous boards, has actually done annual evaluations, which was not done typically. So, you know, upside, downside. It is my fervent hope that we can have an evaluation instrument for the superintendent before January. I think that would be good.
Director.
Ideally, we should have had this months ago, but we didn't. We have it now. Let's do this.
Although it is inextricably linked to our board goals, which we were waiting till the resolution of that.
Right, but we did that in October.
Right.
It's now December.
Director Lau, I think you sort of weighed in on this question earlier.
Yeah, I'm good. But my question is, in the past, have you all augmented the OSBA goals? Was that those 9 goals from OSBA you haven't? You've just taken them as they were?
We combined a couple.
You combined them? Okay.
We did all sorts of.
Yeah.
You made them worse. Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm starting to get the shakes just thinking about it.
I think that what we have is really great, and I think, as Superintendent Guerrero said, what I really appreciate about those 5 prioritized leadership standards is it's in alignment with all the work that is happening around. We're going into negotiations with unions. We're talking about how we invest the Student Success Act money, thinking about the GVC, and talking about that continued, getting our vision out there and communicating with our community. I mean, these are the things that I've heard again and again us talk about, that retention and recruitment of diverse instructors, like you mentioned, Director Brim-Edwards. So I'm actually very, very pleased with this, that it's both those performance goals, which are the heart of our student outcomes, and then these standards to say, we, like you said, Superintendent Guerrero, how you do these things matters, and people are looking not just at, okay, our reading score is up, but how is PPS conducting itself? What is the culture shift? And I think this does a really good job of capturing all of that. So I'm ready to say yes with the equity additions and the stakeholder investment.
I would propose that we pass it as is tonight and have an amended version on the consent agenda, so that we send a clear signal that we're
Director to pass.
So I would like to have, if we're
Yeah,
gonna do that,
come
then
back.
I wanna
We'll
go
come
through
back.
all
Yep.
the issues that I would like to.
Well, we're doing a lightning round on it.
You know what? I'm going to get my questions answered, because this is so out of respect for everybody, was off for Thanksgiving, and I think nobody expected the superintendent or others to work over Thanksgiving, which is the only time we've had it. We got information today. I don't think it's unreasonable for us to spend time working through a document in which we got last Tuesday. And we tried not to. So Russ was traveling, Dr. Brown, and Guadalupe the superintendent was, as we all were, with our families. So I don't think it's unreasonable to have a discussion about it.
We'll give you the time. I don't think we need to draw it out. I think we can.
Well,
go
I'm not
through-
going to draw it out. So if
I think so. So actually, Director DePass, did you have? in terms of the
I am not comfortable just saying it's great as it is. I'd like to have a couple more weeks to provide input. I'm not confident that if it goes out the way it is, that the way that I'd like to see the language put in would be adopted. I'm just in favor of a couple more weeks.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to.
In terms of process, I think it's important. I was traveling also. I feel like I'd like more time.
Yeah.
I'd like to actually read through the red lines.
So
I
let
just
me
got this
let me
tonight.
propose this.
well, Okay, there.
Okay, they're comments.
So
But
there's
I'd
a,
like,
there's a
I'd like time
document.
to digest it.
So I'm going to actually, I'm
I'd like time to digest
going to
it.
propose a process, and based on feedback that I just heard, I think there is there's a majority that wants to move forward with a couple of changes around this, but we want to make sure we get those changes right. And I'm hearing from Director DePass and others that, taking a couple weeks to make sure we get those right and voting on the consent agenda next time makes sense. What I would like to do is just go through these changes and sort of quickly get a sense of whether there's majority support or not. That will let us know in terms of what we need to focus on over the next 2 weeks. So what I have heard so far is that there is majority support for strengthening the racial equity language. And we've heard a little bit from staff, and so we will do that. I think I heard majority support for putting more emphasis on the district goals. So in terms of an overall rating, figuring out a way that there's more emphasis on the district goals and the leadership standards. I think
Even though I would say that that's actually called out in the preamble of the document, it states very clearly that it is oriented to the leadership goals and that it includes the other performance standards.
Well,
But
actually,
yes, I agree.
the way it's phrased currently is it's focused on the performance standard supplemented by the goals. So I would suggest flipping it. Or you could do what Director Bailey said is like, is there value in having an overall score, or do you just not weight them, but you don't have an overall score? No.
And then, and so we can wordsmith that outside of the meeting. And then one of the things we haven't talked about yet, but it came up in terms of conversations, was getting input from stakeholders. I want to make sure we don't get caught up in 360-degree evaluation language, because that has a whole sort of consultants do that, et cetera. For me, what's important is that we have a mechanism as part of the superintendent's self-evaluation for gathering input from stakeholders, and in my mind, that's senior leadership and school principals. I don't think it's appropriate for the board to gather that information. I think it's appropriate for the superintendent, as he does his self-evaluation, to gather that. I think he would do that anyway, but I think if the board sets that expectation and says very clearly that we want to make sure that's part of that process, that's something I would support. We haven't talked about that yet, so let me put that on the table and get some quick feedback. And I guess what I'm saying in lightning round, I'm not trying to limit this conversation, but I also think we can move forward through these issues more quickly than
Okay,
we
well, I'm
have.
going to
I
speak to the.
support asking this, making sure that the superintendent includes that in his self-evaluation.
So I had suggested language that came actually from based on because the OSBA evaluation workbook has actually, they suggest 360 feedback. It's not a 360 evaluation, and they're very clear that the board is responsible for determining the valuation. It just provides information to the board. But I think there should be agreement between the board and the superintendent on who provides feedback. I do think for the integrity of the process, it should come directly to the board.
So yeah, I disagree with that. I
It's
don't
fine.
think I don't think we have a mechanism for gathering that information.
It's certainly allowed for, and I'll just, I circulated to the rest of the board how Beaverton does it. They have a basic template that stakeholders fill out. It's essentially a rating system. They use the standards, and then there's the one open-ended question.
And the board sends that out?
Yes.
Like individual board member? I'm just
I don't know the mechanics.
mechanically-
I don't know the mechanics how they do it, but I shared with you.
Yeah, I looked at it. It didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't have details about that. So.
Right. Well, we can get details.
So that I have not seen that at all, because it came at 4:30 this afternoon, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I was at my job, so I haven't seen it. I have seen the OSBA template, and you seem not to be terribly thrilled with the OSBA template, but all of a sudden
Well,
you're...
I don't have any issue with the standards. I just would have picked maybe different standards.
So it is not best practice nationally for the school board to commission a 360 evaluation of the superintendent.
That's not what was being suggested, and what was being suggested is completely aligned with what's in the OSBA standards. And I say, you can, do you want the book?
I read it.
Right. So it's in the OSBA standards, and lots of other districts do it. And the reason you got it today
But
is.
you were objecting to the standards.
I wasn't-
So
I wasn't objecting to the
It's unclear to
standards.
me. You
Okay,
seem to be cherry picking from the OSBA handbook how you want the superintendent evaluation to go. And it is not national best practice for a school board to commission a 360 even feedback or evaluation of the superintendent.
Director Moore, are you comfortable asking the superintendent to gather stakeholder input as part of his
Yes.
self-evaluation? Director Lowry?
Yeah.
Yes.
Stakeholder input as part of the superintendent's evaluation? I'm seeing some general nods.
Yes, please.
Those were the issues that I had. Director Brim-Edwards, I know you had a mock-up version. Are there any issues you want to raise as part of this process?
I do. So I want to go to the performance standards and what's new from when we adopted them is now at the bottom of each standard, it has a indicator that describes how you would rate ineffective, developing, effective, and accomplished. And the way that so I would suggest that we change the definition of effective and accomplished, because in effect, on most of these goals, you could have the district make no gains, and you actually would be effective and if you had a 1% gain, you'd be accomplished, and that just seems like a low standard.
So that's consistent with the goals that the board adopted.
I'm talking
No.
about the rating at the bottom.
Right.
And I think the issue here is that since this is the first year, these goals were set after the rollout of the budget, that there has been some maneuvering of things that, if this was a 10%, if it was moving from the baseline of 44 to the baseline of 54, that effective within 1% would make sense. But because it's such a small goal, so I'm not comfortable changing that, because I think we're in this development year. And I feel like we have to be realistic about when those goals were rolled out, and that our trend has been negative. So to even say we're moving positively or staying still is actually a positive versus the losses we've made. So I would not be in favor of changing those because of that.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think we adopted these goals, and we talked about those interim measures, and particularly after that 1 year, what we expected. And I think this is reflective of that.
Yep.
And I think we all voted on that.
Yeah.
So what we didn't vote on is how we would rate that in terms of performance. What we discussed was, I just have a hard time voting for something that has effective potentially just being a standstill.
But that's exactly what we said the first year would be when we had that conversation. I mean, honestly, it feels a little bit like you're backing away from the goals that we adopted.
I'm not backing away from the goals at all. It's just, I wouldn't rate it as effective if we stand still, because I'm pretty sure for the last 3 years, we have been focusing on third grade reading. I mean, it's not like these haven't been.
Okay, I wouldn't support that. Do we have other sense around the table?
I'm satisfied the way they are. I'm satisfied.
Okay. Next issue.
The Superintendent Guru, can you walk through the discussion of the third grade map? And I don't know if Dr. Brown wants to. We got a 3-page memo today that says. Let me try and sum it up, and you tell me if I got it right. That the measurements that we will have in terms of performance are not actually going to be the actual data of all of our let's take third grade reading, of all of our third grade readers, because not all third grade students have the map, but that based on statistical analysis, the results will be representative of the student body.
Did
of the
we
third-
have
of
this
the third grade.
conversation
Yes,
2
we
weeks
are.
ago?
We
Yes,
did.
So
We
I-
had it at our work session.
Well, I'm just,
I think you just stated it,
And
Director Brim
you
Edwards.
just stated it perfectly.
so I think what we should do in the language is just make clear that it's a representative sample.
So you're asking us to change the goals?
No, what the numbers are, this is like a footnote, that it is a representative, not the actual number.
Are you
Superintendent
talking about
Guru,
the entire universe of third graders versus that subset?
Yes.
It's
What
just
I'm
not-
saying
not
is-
everyone takes the MAP test.
I would be fine with
Can we
adding,
let
sorry.
the Superintendent.
So Director Brim Edwards asked this question earlier. We kind of gathered quickly and shared a memo in response to the board today. And it is true, we're still scaling out these interim performance assessments for students. However, the end size we have is almost 50%. And so it's a very, not only is it a strong, have a strong correlation to the summative outcomes we would expect, but we know that the half of the students almost that are taking it, they tend to be some of our most underserved students in some of our CSI schools, because they're taking advantage of moving more quickly with MAP implementation, which we applaud and support school leaders and faculties there. So I think that's what we're trying to reiterate, that even as more schools come aboard at more grade levels providing the MAP because they find it useful to their instructional conversations, that nonetheless what we've posted thus far should be a reasonably predictable representation of how we might think other students would do. How did I do, Dr. Brown? Okay.
So what I'm suggesting is that we somehow footnote in that's a representative example. I'll give you an example why I think it's important for an external community is when you have these goals and you say, this is what we did, and the school says, well, we don't use MAP. And it's like, and you're saying, actually, not you personally, but the district is saying, hey, this is what the numbers were, when in reality, we're using representative samples. So I think if we explain it, so like so that it makes sense to school staff,
So
to parents.
I would say I think
not-
it's fine in terms of how we communicate in the future on these goals. It may become important. I wouldn't support changing it in here in terms of evaluation template. I don't think it's an important detail since we've got information from staff.
I wouldn't
about it
support
being
changing it on the evaluation, but I do think as we go forward with the goals, it is an important piece to add to the communication around the goals to the public.
I agree with that.
I think staff committed to not just disaggregating, but I think the board would see that the end size is shifting year over year. It would naturally anyways, because the cohort is a different one. But we recognize that as we institutionalize it, there's going to be greater numbers of students taking it.
So another question, and we may have gotten this literally right before the meeting, but I was at the student district council meeting. So on performance goal 4, do we, there was a memo that was sent that had new data in it, but we got it at the last minute, so I'm not sure.
I think in response to your question in the last couple days, the superintendent sent an email saying that they did add some of the baseline data on goals 1, 2, 3, but that baseline data on goal 4 would take more time to develop, which I think we had been told previously at our work session.
So I have a question about, so is that correct? So what got added was to 1, 2, and 3? Because I don't have your
Right,
5
so
o'clock
the
memo here.
baseline data on the SBAC-related performance indicators are using last year's or spring assessment data, if you wanted to consider that baseline, or in some cases, Dr. Brown and I had this conversation earlier, you're seeing the MAP mid-year from last year. So you have some context and point of reference to what would be the interim mid-year measure this year.
So I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at all these documents. Is it this document with the holes punched in the top that we got at 5 o'clock.
Copier holes you're looking at. We did send
Okay.
in
Sorry.
our last email.
But it's in goals 1, 2, and this isn't the right one. This is mine, so that's pre.
Dr. Brown, do you want to clarify what data we have access to and
I'm
which
sorry,
doesn't exist?
I'm trying to make sure I have the right.
So was I.
No need for spectators.
I was appreciating your coverage of the memo. So Director Brim Edwards, a document was produced earlier and provided to the board that gave the board goals, the interim measures, and the baseline data for all of those. It was a single-page document printed on 11 by 17. That information was transferred into the performance evaluations for goals 1, 2, and 3. I think what was missing for goals 1, 2, and 3 was the baseline information. They have been created, again, as part of that original one-page document. With respect to Goal 4, as you all will recall, Goal 4 is based on the proportion of graduates who meet one or more of these post-secondary readiness criteria. So for an interim progress measure, it gets a little tricky, because first we must estimate those students who are on track to graduate, which actually the system's been doing that and doing that quite well for a while. And it's actually work that I've done in a couple other settings, and it's really how you leverage to create change in the grad rate. And you back that up, you start at 12th grade and then you sort of back that way all the way back into 9th and sometimes into middle school to understand how to get kids on track to graduate. So once you've identified that pool of students who you think are on track to graduate, then you have to look to see what proportion of those students are meeting one or more of these criteria for post-secondary readiness by mid-year in their 12th grade year. And there are multiple pathways to do that. This is not something that the system has done before in terms of tracking. There is substantial logic involved in creating that report, and it has to be vetted, and it's not something that can be done quickly. I have a team that's working on it currently, and we have committed to provide that data as part of the mid-year process. So shortly after the end of the first semester, we should have a sense of what proportion of our students, again, disaggregated, because we've committed to disaggregating this data, and I think you guys have received disaggregated data from us repeatedly at this point. I commit that by the end, shortly after the end of the first semester, we should have a sense of what proportion of our students are meeting one or more of those criteria. And then we will backward map that over time, all the way down into middle school, again, to try to leverage getting more and more students on track for that. Much like criteria like that have been developed to track and move students to graduation, we'll move that downward and use that to leverage changes for our students moving forward.
Great. Thank you.
So I understand the memo that we had from September 30th that has data, that's the backwards looking, and you're saying you're going to be looking at the you're going to go all the way back, but the seniors, so the baseline data, let's just take the AP with C or above, which is 4.1. The baseline data would be that we'd be looking at as like seniors in the fall, or
the baseline data, if we had that data, would have been the mid-year scores from last year, or the mid-year, I shouldn't say scores, the mid-year performance of students who were on track to meet the AP criteria for post-secondary readiness. That is, they had either enrolled by that point and passed 3 or more AP classes with the C or above, or they had enrolled in 2 or more AP courses and passed them with the C or above, and were currently enrolled in an AP course and were anticipated to get a C or above. It's a forward-looking metric. Much like if you go back to the 8th grade metrics, we're using MAP to predict whether or not a student's going to be proficient at the end of the year.
so the baseline for the AP could be any student currently in high school.
At current, I would suggest that it should be based on 12th grade. And those students in 12th grade who are on track to meet the AP criteria. That is the logic that's currently being worked on. So of those students who are on track to graduate, which of those students who are on track to graduate are also on track to be able to meet an AP criteria? Extend that same logic to IB, dual credit, CTE.
And so that would be the fall look. And so the desired endpoint would be for the AP at the end of the year, how many of those on track to graduate, enrolled in AP, had actually end up with 3 AP courses, C or better?
The desired endpoint is the proportion of students who meet the post-secondary criteria one way or another. And because we do not have separate goals for AP, IB, et cetera, you don't have compound goals, you have singulars.
Okay.
So I just want, because I think what you just said is an important thing. So really, we're not going to have anything below here, is that right? I'm sorry. If what you said, we don't have compound goals, we just have the top goals. So what you're saying is underneath the 4.1, 4.2, since we're not having compound goals, we're not going to have goals related to that? I just want to understand. I'm not arguing. I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, I understand. But the goal for this, you have 4 district adopted goals. You have 4 goals that the board has voted upon.
I think we're only talking about on goal 4.
I understand, but I'm saying that the
I guess I'm talking about the progress measures. I just want, do you understand what my question is? Is like, is this ever going to be filled in, or?
What Dr. Brown is saying is the board has 4 goals. We're providing you with some progress measures, which it's hard to provide when we're in progress. Therefore,
Those goals I think are intended to be leading indicators so that you know midway through the year, are you on track to meet that overall? And because there are multiple pathways to get there, we're providing the multiple ways, information on the multiple ways that students could get to that end. It's leading data. But in the end, the final goal is based on the proportion of
It's what it all rolls
what it
up
all
to.
rolls up to.
So I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand this, and also
I just want to move forward. We have more stuff on the agenda tonight. So did you have any other issues? Because is this something we can take offline in terms of understanding these details?
Yes, because I think it's an important point, because we actually don't, it's not that we don't care, but it's the top line number that you're saying.
Director Brim-Edwards, did you have anything else in terms of the evaluation?
So I guess I'm just going to note as long as things are going offline, that sort of best practice is always to pull from last year's evaluation anything that we had as development opportunities. So if there's anything in there that fits underneath the leadership in any of the standards, that I think we should pull that forward.
I think that was the lens, one of the primary lenses that the superintendent used in choosing specific criteria from
Okay, I just think,
OSBA.
I want to be specific about that. And then, I guess my only comment about, I thought this was the standard, well, they're indicators, and we're not to rate each indicator. I thought the labor relations one was relatively, just the indicators weren't very fully developed, and I want to flag that.
So those are the OSBA rubric.
Right, so I think that they said they're indicators, and just in fairness of putting everything on the table, I think they aren't reflective of what they're not very, I think they're one-dimensional versus looking at whether the district stays within its financial goals and also aligns with our vision, not just that we have all this important trust at the bargaining table. So
That's why you also have a standard on resource management.
Pardon?
That's where that comes in.
Yeah.
Resource management.
Okay, I have 3 things that we're going to be working on, and we'll bring this back for a vote next time, making explicit racial equity, including explicit racial equity language in the evaluation, looking at the scoring to put more emphasis on the district goals, and evaluate and having the superintendent gather stakeholder input as part of the self-evaluation process. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Chair Constam. We'll bring this back in a draft form and hopefully vote on it consent. Oh, Superintendent
Just for
Guerrero,
clarity,
sorry.
if the board would
Yes.
like any support from staff in this task that it has, just so I know up front, because we've been doing our best to be responsive in real time. So if the board needs anything to finish this instrument, please advise. And if I could also leave my dear board members with something to think about as you land this performance evaluation, to give some thought about, and in hindsight, how it might hope to support its superintendent being successful in each of these areas that you decide to evaluate me on. Thank you.
Yes, and that's a great point. Something else that came up from a number of board members that I also agree with is we need to figure out a way to gather stakeholder feedback about board performance. This is something that OSBA also asks boards to do, and I think it would be a really good exercise for us to go through, particularly hearing from senior staff in terms of our performance supporting you and the district's goals. So we don't have anything formal, and we're not going to talk about it tonight. I'm just putting it on the table as something to maybe come back to.
I'm going to talk about it tonight. Well, I attended a really great class at OSBA that was about board evaluations, and I actually took extensive notes and have a document to share with all the board members that I'll be forwarding on as soon as I can figure out how to format it properly. So I'll ask my teenage daughter.
Great.
But so that should be coming out. But they have some really great tools that they're rolling out at OSBA that I think will help us do that work. And I think, like you said, Director Scott, it's crucial.
So may I ask, on this resolution, is someone making a motion to postpone this to a definite date certain?
We have not put the motion on
Okay.
the table to introduce this, so we're just
You're just not going to
pausing.
introduce it all? Okay.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Dr. Scott.
Wow, he's got a promotion.
Thank you, Director Scott. Moving on to the resolution authorizing the Community Budget Review Committee charter. Next, we will consider this resolution authorizing the Community Budget Review Committee charter, also known as the CBRC. The CBRC was established for the purpose of budget review and recommendations, and also monitors and advises the board on the allocation and expenditure of our local option levy funds. The committee members are appointed by the board to serve in an advisory capacity, with members serving a 3-year term and a student member appointed to a 1-year term. The board will now consider Resolution 6009, authorizing the Community Budget Review Committee charter. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Director DePass moves and Director Scott seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 6009. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment on Resolution 6009?
No.
Is there any additional board discussion on this resolution?
I want
yes.
to. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there are, I think it's a good document overall. There are a couple of things that, I was talking to Director Lowry earlier. I think there are a couple of places where we might want to tweak it a bit. I think they're relatively minor. So I don't know whether they would require us postponing this until the next time.
What do they pertain to, or how minor are they?
Well, okay, let me see if I can. So this was hours ago, so who remembers?
So as she's looking, one thing I'm going to say is we would need to amend it to say 1 or 2 students, because we
Right.
currently have 2 students that are going to be appointed. We also, Director Moore and I were talking about how the students become appointed. And so, as Maxine shared with us at the student mixer, the student leadership is going to be the ones selecting those students. So that should also be in the charter of how the student come to the group. We also, Director Moore and I also talked about how members of CBRC can be dismissed by the board for not attending. And while we served on CBRC, we actually had several times where members didn't attend a meeting in over a year. And so we needed to remove that person so that we could then have the board appoint another, or, you know, we had to ask the board to remove that person so another person could be appointed.
Yeah.
Do you feel able to craft an amendment
Right now?
addressing those 3 items right now?
Yes.
They seem fairly straightforward.
Right now?
So
Sure.
another issue is, particularly for students, but for all CBRC members, is orientation. But since community members tend to come with some background in budget, while students probably not, some pretty structured orientation, I think, would be important to support student members especially.
And do you feel like that needs to be addressed specifically in the charter? Or I think we could ask Director Lowry as our board representative to make sure that that happens in a responsible manner.
I will be working with Cynthia Lee to make sure that we have an orientation for all members, because as a member of CBRC, I found it very helpful to have that brief, up-to-date orientation as I came aboard. So I think all new members should have that opportunity, especially our students, but including the adults as well.
And I spoke to Representative Latterell before she needed to go home and do her homework, and she was just really glad for the opportunity to have the student members and to have 2 this year, and already 2 very willing participants. So that was her only feedback that she wanted to relay on this.
So while you're wordsmithing, I'll just make a comment. I just want to thank the staff and for helping create, I think, a really clear and transparent process and timeline for the community, so that people will know. This year we had we had a lot of applicants, which is, I think, a great sign. And so I appreciate that we now have a really clear process that we can point to, that community members who want to serve know what the process is and what's expected of them, and that we also have incorporated also the ethics just guidelines within this. So I think this is a great memorialization of the charter.
Thank you.
You want me to keep talking, Director Moore?
Yeah.
Because I can.
Well, she's got a First Amendment.
Okay,
So she's going to keep reading while I read her First Amendment. It would be under the, I should turn on my microphone and actually talking to it. It would be on the structure. I move that we amend that to read on the last sentence, 1 or 2 student members will be appointed to a 1-year term through a process determined by the DSC.
Second.
Spelled out.
Straightforward
out.
enough. So are you moving that?
I am moving that.
Moved and seconded.
Yes?
Yeah, Director Bailey seconded.
Oh, excuse me. Director Lowry moves.
Put the chocolate down and get to work.
Director Lowry moves the amendment as described regarding the appointment of 1 or 2 student representatives to the CBRC as determined, their election determined by processes from the District Student Council. Moved by Director Lowry, seconded by Director Bailey. All in favor, say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? That amendment passes 7-0, giving us time to now consider this next amendment.
Okay, this next amendment goes at the end of the first paragraph after the numbered section. And it reads.
Is that clear to you, Ms. Kane?
Under charge. Yes.
Yeah, it starts, the CBRC receives direction from the board, that paragraph. It's, so it'll be adding 2 additional sentences to the end of that paragraph. Members are expected to attend committee meetings. Persistent lack of participation may result in the termination of a member's board appointment.
So is that specific enough? You've been on it, so I don't know.
Yeah, the committee is
Or
also,
too subjective.
the committee is also developing bylaws.
Oh, perfect.
So I think the bylaws can be much more specific.
It just, I think it gives the chairs, I think one of the issues we faced when we were on the CBRC was that the chairs didn't have the teeth to enforce sometimes the attendance things. So this just makes it very explicitly clear the board's expectation.
We didn't really have the authority, because it's a board appointment, so the committee itself can't. But this will provide the chair and the committee with the authority to establish its own rules around attendance.
Okay, do I have a motion to amend the resolution as was just described regarding the removal of
I did say I move as I started reading.
Excuse me?
I did say I move as I started
Second.
reading.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's
Okay,
okay.
Director Lowry moves, Director Bailey seconds. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Please,
Yes.
any opposed? Any abstentions? The amendment is passed by a vote of 7-0. We are, any further discussion? We have moved the underlying amendment, so, oh, excuse me, Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
All right, the board will now vote on Resolution 6009 regarding the CBRC charter. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6009 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Laterell absent, but having done her part by recruiting student members.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have board and committee conference reports? Director Scott, you need to depart, given that you are on East Coast time and your work starts on West Coast time tomorrow. You
Yes,
may
it sure
feel free
does.
to do so.
Thank you. Yeah, we are having another bond subcommittee meeting tomorrow at 4:30. Most of you were at the last one, so I don't need to give too much of an update, but we did get an update from the Bond Accountability Committee, and we got an update on the bond audit, and just sort of talked through some minor issues there. The issue of teen parent and health clinics did come up, and one of the things we kicked back to board leadership is the determination whether that issue should stay in the bond committee or needs to come back for a full work session to the board as a whole. So I think we're just waiting in terms of next steps on that. And then the main topic of conversation really is bond planning and timing, and that's what we're going to be talking about again tomorrow. Staff has fleshed out a more detailed 2020 timeline in terms of what that would entail if we move forward with a 2020 bond. So we'll have some conversations about that.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Director Moore, the Policy Committee.
The Policy Committee met on November 25th. We did it was a busy meeting. It was a long meeting. We established priorities for the rest of the year in terms of the policies that we're going to tackle for revision. And the work at hand right now is completing work on the search and seizure policy, especially incorporating the feedback that we've gotten from students. And staff are working on developing proposed language to revise the policy as it currently stands. And the student conduct policy is, I think, nearing completion. And we had a second round of feedback from school communities and parents and students. So that is, I think that policy is nearing completion, and we applied the racial equity lens to the policy, and I think there are some changes that are being. I'm looking to Roseanne here. I think staff are working on some revisions that will come back at the next meeting. And then we started discussion of the 3 policies that are related to student assignment. So the policies are the student assignment policy, educational options, and enrollment and transfer. And we're looking to analyze those policies in terms of how they promote or not the racial educational equity policy principles, and how we can develop policies that will provide appropriate guidance for the determination of feeder pattern for Kellogg Middle School when it opens in 2021. And then beyond that, the boundary work that is where there's a lot of technical analysis going on right now. So, and our next meeting is soon. It's every 3 weeks, so count back from November 25th.
December 16th.
December 16th, thank you.
I would say that I hadn't used the racial equity social justice lens yet, and I thought it was really helpful to do that process at the policy committee. And then what I found myself was beginning to internalize it and think about what are some of the assumptions I'm making. So I think it felt a little clunky as we started, but the more we use those tools, I think the more we'll really embody looking at the world in that way. The Charter and Alternative Programs Committee met. We are doing the work of reviewing charters and then also having deeper talks with our community-based organizations like the Mount Scott Learning Center that had some of their board of directors speaking tonight. And we'll be talking at our next meeting, January 13th, about some of the charter plan and then also the Student Investment Act and how we include the equity lens with our charter schools. And with our CBOs. So it was a really productive meeting. We got a lot of people in the room that hadn't necessarily talked to one another before about how both charter schools and CBOs can infuse the district and also be in better relationship. So I think there's a productive start to sort of this new iteration of how that committee is functioning.
Well, we'll also be doing site visits.
Yes, we'll also be doing site visits. So, and we'll be letting other board members know if you want to come along.
Director Bailey, do you want to report out from your attendance at the Talented and Gifted Advisory Committee meeting?
Yes, so a couple of things. The district now does tag assessments twice during the year. They're adding MAP and SBAC as kind of further keys looking for that. There's professional development going on for the tag coordinators at each school that includes around identification, particularly for historically underserved populations. I think it's, once a month all the tag coordinators get together for PD. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, because these notes were taken a couple of weeks ago, but am I okay so far? All right. So one of the top, one question is, where are they going to be in the budget next year in terms of what's the next step for improving our services to talented and gifted students? A question raised about, are there ways to, for example, in a K-5, to structure the timing of delivery of different subject matters that would allow more walk to, so that students could move up a grade during that time period, or to in general support more differentiation. And finally, they floated a couple of them floated an interesting idea for our CSI, TSI Title I schools, which is to look at not necessarily tag identified kids, but the upper quarter in terms of test scores. And I talked to Dr. Brown about doing some data analysis to see, does that upper end grow at the same rate at a CSI schools as it would at a relatively high-income school? Probably not, is the initial thought. And so would it make sense to have some, not call them tag TOSAs, but differentiation upper end TOSAs to help our CSI, TSI schools achieve our growth metrics if those higher scoring students don't get the differentiation they need in the current where we are currently. And of course, a lot of our attention is going to be on the kids who are 1-2 grade levels behind. But since our growth target looks at all students, we have an incentive to make sure that all students are hitting that growth target. So that's an idea that's out there. I talked to Dr. Brown. He thought it would be pretty simple to do a data analysis like that, and it's something to throw in the mix as we look into budget season. And finally, I think it would be good for the committee leaders to come before the board at least once a year to talk about what's going on. You know, they've come up with plans every year for years about how to expand TAG services, and the money's never been there. So they're wondering, okay, what's the next step? You know, we took a step this year. What's the next step?
All right, thank you very much. We have no other committee reports, I don't think.
Just to note that we have an audit committee meeting on the 5th from 4:30 to 5 to 6:30, and we'll be getting presentations from both the consolidated on the CAFR and also the financial audit and also the bond performance audit.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, the next meeting of the board will be held December 17th, 2019. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. This meeting is adjourned.